You have now entered the no friend zone. Shalom, 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 family. Giving all praise to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to our ancestors, to our families, to our loved ones, to our friends, to those who are outside of the diaspora of Israel, who sojourn and walk with us, who are friends to this nation of Israel. Peace and blessings to you all. Today, man, we're going to get into something interesting. And it's really not a response video or breakdown or presentation. It's more about just making sure that we deal with the pseudoisms and the gaslighting, the fringe theorists, narratives that we hear, a lot of the finger pointing that we see. And I said this is not a response, but one of the things that really got me to do this particular presentation, as you guys can see, the assassination of Alberta, Christine Williams King, the matriarch, and I'm going to say the architect of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of our great leaders today in history, that there's a lot of misconceptions about the things that King did. We got a lot of the things right. But I really want to get into dealing with the assassination of Alberta Williams King. And the reasons why is that a couple of months back, I think back in February, when I really started looking into this, and this is really how long I've been actually going into this information. I'm trying to condense it for this particular show. And shalom, Shadow Yisrael. What I'm going to do is put my email address in the chat, and you can email me that way, and we'll talk. All right. Peace and blessings to you, family. Peace and blessings to you, family. And what I wanted to do is deal with the information in regards to the assassination of Alberta Williams King, the mother of the late great Dr. King, and the Black Hebrew Israelites and the CIA connection to that. A few months back in February, I think around, what they call Black History Month or whatever, Dr.Reggy, I guess in his attempt to chide or finger point or belittle or talk about or distress the idea of those who go by the term Black Hebrew Israelites or Israelites or whatever, begging the question or asking the question as if we as Israelites needed to answer the question as to why allegedly, well, not allegedly, as to why we know, I should say, is why we know a gentleman by the name of Marcus Chenault assassinated Alberta King in 1974 while playing the organ in Ebenezer Church. Upon the investigation and his arrest, things came out about Mr. Chenault being tied to the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. And some reports, the New York Times uh, talked about how this Black Hebrew Israelite movement of paradigm shifted his understanding and hatred towards Christians, although Mr. Chenault himself and his family talked about him being raised as a Christian, right? Family and friends. Most of his family and friends were Christians. Most of the people who he attended Ohio State University with were Christians. And although they talked about a slight disposition that he had, but he never threatened them as Christians. So I want to talk about and get into the things as to why we see, and I'm not saying I have all of the answers, because no one has all of the answers, but the question was posed, the challenge was made by Dr.Reggy a couple of months ago on the HOK and other platforms. I've seen him do it a couple of times, as to why we needed to respond as Black Hebrew Israelites to the assassination and murder of Alberta Williams King, the mother of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And of course, we have no reason to respond to it. Of course, the actions of one individual does not represent the actions of a whole, but this is a part of the disinformation campaign, right? That a lot of these disinformation cell groups try to push these narratives that if that goes against the old saying that one bad apple spoils the whole bunch, right? So they try to discredit the Bible. They try to discredit the Torah. They try to discredit the followers of Yahweh. They try to discredit us by individuals who you clearly see oftentimes are not practicing Torah, right? To the best of their abilities. No one is perfect, right? The Bible doesn't call for perfection, where you, to a degree, the Torah doesn't call for perfection, where you are at a place where there's nothing you do wrong, or there's nothing that you fail, that you can't fail at, or something that you can't fail in, right? But when it talks about maturity, when it talks about perfection, it talks about maturity, that you're trying, right, to do the best, right? And you're trying to walk out these laws, statutes, and commandments to the best of your abilities. But oftentimes we see people attempt to attack Israelites as a whole, or even in a Black community, attack us as a whole, simply based on the actions of a few. And that's a racist, white supremacist tactic that these guys often use in these disinformation cell groups to attack Israelites, and even to attack others in the Black community. We have to really watch people who do this all the time, right? Instead of sticking to the information and isolating these things, they'll rather say, well, because he was a Black Hebrew Israelite, that Chenault killed Alberta Williams King, because he followed the God of the Bible, right? But there are many, millions throughout the course of history and time that have joined themselves to the law, that are keepers of the law in the Torah, that believe in God, Christians as well, right? Who follow the Bible to their degree, whatever their paradigm is, but they're not going around killing people. They're not assassinating people, right? It's a very fallacious argument that they make, but they do this simply not based on trying to understand the information, or try to understand or put out information that is actually true, right? Or even vet the information, but they simply read something that's negative, that someone makes a negative statement about an Israelite or a Black Hebrew Israelite, and then they pounce on it as if they have a smoking gun or something that they want to say, listen, this is why you shouldn't follow the God of this Bible. They do that very often over there on HOK. And the reason why they do that is because they you know, at the end of the day, they're a bunch of heathens to a degree, right? So I would say that unfettered. So I want to get into this presentation real quick, and please bear with me as I go through this information, right? And so we want to do that. So we want to do that now. I see you, Black Jesus Minister. Shout out to Fopi, man. Appreciate you in the building. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate your wisdom. Appreciate your wisdom. Appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate it. That's what we do in Israel. We look out for one another. That's how it's done. Appreciate you, Black Jesus Minister, in the building. Let me say this, man, before I get into this presentation. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. But we're going to, actually, I'm going to be a couple of announcements. I'm going to be involved in the Ultimate Debate League tournament with Black Jesus Minister, JJ 7000. I think Solar Vision Debate League is a part of that as well. And Debate Talk for You. Shout out to Sal Showtime. And I said to myself, I wasn't going to really be involved in, in any tournaments like that anymore for my stints on, for my long run on SVDL. But I did like the concept that they came up with, and as well as that it's not a season, right? It's just a tournament. Because I don't really have the time to do a season, right, or a league or anything like that. But this is a tournament. But also the quality of debaters that I saw that they had, and then their attention to putting this thing together the right way, along with the judging system. So shout out to Black Jesus Minister, JJ 7000, Sal Showtime, and I believe Soul Division Debate League, and all the other participants. I think it's going to be a good show. You're going to get some great information. I think I've been placed against some brother who I have no idea who he is, but I will find out shortly. And once I do that, then we can go into a little bit more. But I'm getting ready to share my screen. Also, have a very interesting conversation. Shout out to Sister Napa Shadar as well. She's facilitating debates or attempting to do that. And I had a long conversation with her as well as Killer Priest. And I'm going to be doing some things with them in the upcoming weeks. So please like, share, and subscribe to their channels as well as mine in regards to these up and coming events and things we're going to be a part of. I really want to get information out here. I found out there's a lot of disinformation out here, so I'm going to attempt to do my part, most high willing, to come up against a lot of this, a lot of the lies that we see out here. So hence this podcast that I've been doing recently, there's No Friend Zone. And when I'm talking about no fringes, I'm not talking about fringes, right? That we're Israelites, that we by our law, that we should wear as a remembrance of the things that the Most High done as we were taken out of the land of Israel and birthed into a new nation. And so, but when I'm talking about fringe theorists or fringe theories, right? Things that are not substantiated by fact, right? That are often labeled or believed to be true. And we find that out to be the truth or be the case in these unconscious communities, as I call them. And so these are the things that we really want to come up against uh, and uh, and move forward So uh, let me do this. Right. So yeah. So let's start with this information, right? And again, the truth about the assassination of Alberta Williams King, Black Hebrew Israelites, and the CIA connection. America's fear of a Black Messiah, right? So we're going to get into it, right? We're going to read a couple of articles. There's going to be a lot of reading. So I really wanted to get it in. So here we go. The makings of a Black Messiah, right? Alberta Williams King. And as I began to study Mrs. King, Alberta Williams King, the mother of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what I found is that in her own right, she was very much so an intellectual, very much so an intellectual. Even during the time that she came up in the South, she was very, and we're going to get into the information. She was very well studied, very well read, very talented, a great musician, artist, a teacher, instructor. She was the quintessential matriarch of her family, and she instilled that very much socially conscious, spiritually conscious as well. Very much so the quintessential Black woman, very much the quintessential intellectual. And she raised her children, her two sons and her daughter. She raised her children with this understandings and with this knowledge. She schooled them. She schooled them, homeschooled them. She taught them, instructed them. So she was a powerhouse. She was a powerhouse, and many in the Black community during her time knew of her intellectual prowess and how savvy she was, right? And her accomplishments. And so when we're talking about the makings of a Black Messiah, what I'm going to show in this is that I believe one of the reasons why she was assassinated, and I do believe that it was a conspiratorial effort to assassinate Alberta Williams King, not just her son, right, who was assassinated before her, but why it was important to assassinate or terminate the life of Alberta Williams King. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I believe in studying what I have of her life, and there's much more to study. What I have understand about her is that she created a formula. She developed a formula, right? And this formula she created, right, was how to nurture and create a Black Messiah. And we're going to get into the information, and I'm going to show why I come to this conclusion, which is the reason why at the time the FBI and the CIA, the US government, needed to terminate her. Because what they studied, they didn't study. We all know about COINTELPRO, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But they didn't just study Dr. King and his actions and his movements. They wanted to know psychologically why he was the leader that he was. They wanted to know what made him who he was. They wanted to know what his roots and his foundation was that made him to be not just a charismatic leader, but understanding his high IQ, his intelligence quotient was very high. And his ability to speak and to read, to break down and disseminate information, to see things afar off. His ability to organize, his ability to galvanize a movement of millions of men, women, and children in the Black community, as well as in the white community and around the world. And so they wanted to know and understand the psychology behind it all. Understanding that a lot of these government programs were seeking to manipulate people using mind control tactics. And we're going to show this. This is the No Friend Zone podcast. So we're not talking about fringe theories here. We're not talking about pseudoscience. We're talking about things that they actually were attempting to do. And we're going to give the information and show this in this presentation today. But they wanted to know the psychological makeup, the building blocks of a Black Messiah. And what they found was that all roads led back to Alberta Williams King. This is what they wanted to do. And this is what they found out. And all of their tactics of eavesdropping, stakeouts, infiltrating family members, spying on the King family, they found out that Dr. King's power, right? His drive, right? What made him to keep going in the face of adversity? What was that that unstoppable force? What was that kept him going, even staring in the face of certain death? What was it that kept him going? And what they found was the power of the matriarch in his life. His mother, Alberta Williams King. She was the creator. She was the creator of the Black Messiah. She was the creator of Dr. King. And the U.S. government was afraid, just as they was earlier with Marcus Garvey, just as they were earlier with a lot of African-American men and women of the times. But there was something about Dr. King that they couldn't put their finger on. And what they found was that his rock, shout out to his wife, Coretta Scott King, as well. Peace be upon them all. But what they found, even more so than the strong, listen to this, family, the strong influences and support that Dr. King received from Coretta Scott King, they found out that King himself was taught to look for a wife with that had the same qualities and intellectual prowess. And listen, all that with the nurturing presence to build and take care of a family He got that blueprint from his mother. And so he sought out the woman in his life that he could show his mom that this is this same example that you showed me, and this is what I want for my children. The strength, the integrity, the power, the intellectualism. He found that in Coretta Scott King. But that blueprint, that understanding, that idea, that knowledge came from his mother, Alberta Christine Williams King. And so we're going to get into some of this information, and we're going to talk about why we have a connection with the Black Hebrew Israelites again, why we also have a connection with the FBI, the CIA, and I'm going to also show you guys a connection, how this connects also to Jim Jones in Jamestown. I'm going to tell you, people, like, this thing is it's bigger than probably what I even know in regards to this information and what we still know today, right? But we're definitely going to talk about, and we're going to see the story into whether or not the Black Hebrew Israelites were responsible for the assassination of Alberta Williams King. So let me get into it. The remarkable life and tragic death of Alberta Williams King, the beloved mother of Martin Luther King Jr. Right? Let's go here. Let's read something here. Peace to you, indigenous black man. Peace, family. Let's get into it here. And we're going to read some things here, right? Let me get that out of the way. I don't know what that is. I don't want to deal with that. But it talks about, let me get that out of here. I don't know how that came about, but anyway. The remarkable life and tragic death of Alberta Williams King, the beloved mother of Martin Luther King. And we're going to read. Let me see how I can get rid of that. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. But I don't want to see any of that. They want to do that. We're going to read this article here. It says, though Alberta Williams King is often viewed as a footnote to the Martin Luther King Jr. story, she played a crucial role in shaping her son's thinking about race in America. Let's go down here. All right. And what you have here is Alberta Williams King, Dr. King, and Coretta Scott King. It says the story of Martin Luther King Jr. is well known, but the civil rights activist drew many lessons from his mother, Alberta Williams King, who he called the best mother in the world, right? Indeed, Alberta King led a similar life to her son, deeply religious. She grew up as a pastor's daughter with an interest in activism. So early on, she had a penchant and influence for social activism, right? So we're talking about the makings of a true Black Messiah here, and I believe she cultivated a formula for that. And this is the reason why she was assassinated. And we're going to get into that, right? In addition to raising her 3 children, she worked with the Young Women's Christian Association, the National Association of Advancement of Colored People, and the Women's International League of Peace for Peace and Freedom. So before Dr. King even became the Dr. King that we know of today, his mother was already on the forefront, deep in the trenches of activism. Right? We're going to talk about the early life of Alberta Williams. Again, Let's see if I can see it. If that makes it go right there. If some of y'all can see what I'm reading. There we go. There we go. Born on September 13th. Let me get this out of here. This thing is really bugging me. Born on September 13, 1903 in Atlanta, Georgia, Alberta Christina Williams spent her early life deeply involved in the church. Her father, Adam Daniel Williams, was the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he grown the congregation from 13 people in 1893 to 400 by 1903 per the King Institute. As a young woman, King seemed determined to seek an education. The King Institute reported that she attended high school at Spelman Seminary and earned a teaching certificate at Hampton Normal in the Industrial Institute. Along the way, however, she met a minister named Michael King because married women were forbidden from teaching in Atlanta. King only briefly taught before she and Michael got married in 1926. Then King turned her focus to her family. She and Michael had 3 children together: Willie Christine, Martin, born Michael, and Alfred Daniel in the Atlanta home where King had grown up. And Alberta King would make sure to educate her children about the racially divided world they lived in. And this is a portrait of Dr. King as a youth, his brother, his sister, his grandmother, father, and his mother. And the reason why these things are important is because what we see is a very strong traditional family that we see served them very well. And we're going to get into this, but I wanted to give homage and pay homage to the work that Alberta King herself had done, and the reasons why, again, I feel like with the information that I've put together here, that she developed a formula for creating a Black Messiah. And the U.S. government, the CIA, and the FBI was vehemently opposed to that. And so I wanted to give some background into her education, give some background into her understanding and her idea. Martin Luther King Jr. credits his mother. Watch this, people. This is very crucial. And we have a lot of this is not evident in our families today. The strength and the power of the true matriarch. Martin Luther King Jr. credits his mother with forming his early thinking about race relations in the United States. In spite of her relatively comfortable circumstances, my mother never complacently adjusted herself to the system of segregation. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, according to the King Institute, she instilled a sense of self-respect in all of her children from the very beginning. As Martin Luther King Jr. recalled, his mother sat him down when he was a young boy and explained concepts like discrimination and segregation. She taught me that I should feel a sense of somebodyness, but that on the other hand, I had to go out and face a system that stared me in the face every day, saying, "You are less than, you are not equal to," he wrote. Noting that King also taught him about slavery, the Civil War, and described segregation as a social condition and not a natural order. That is used in the minds of even young people today, that we understand that the wage system and white supremacy, these things are social conditions, not who we are. We're not created or born inferior. So we have to understand that the matriarch in the family of Dr. King, his mother, Alberta King, was influential in creating and establishing who he was today during that time, during that day and time. and even as we know him today. He continued on to say, she made it clear that she opposed this system and that I must never allow it to make me feel inferior. Then she said the words that almost every Negro hears before he can yet understand the injustice that makes them necessary. You are as good as anyone. We miss that today in a lot of our families, in our schools, in our communities, when speaking and dealing with our youth. I'm from Chicago, so I'm familiar with the O Block, right? And you know, named after O.D. Perry, right? Peace to O.D. Perry. Rest in peace. And the influence that he had on young people. Because now even his name and the respect that they had from him, regardless of how we talk about O Block, it's almost famous. They're famous around the world, right? And clearly a young brother from O Block, who was shot and killed a few years ago, King Von. Sharky, rest in peace to King Von. Did an interview, right? Very talented brother. Even at the time of his passing, was one of the best rap artists out there. Just rapping about a great storyteller, rapping about the things that he went through in his life. And in that, he often said that he could only talk about the things that he experienced, but he had love from his mother. Didn't really know his father that well, but he had great admiration and respect for his mother. But you can see, even in the situation that he had to grow up in, being from O Block, that he still had this innate natural affection and love for his children. Peace, Afro-Asiatic 19, shalom, man. For his children. His children and his family were important to him. Even in the music, even in his lyrics, regardless of that, right? He was very much a family man, from what I can understand. And so even though certain conditions around us may dictate to our environment, we still have an innate reckoning for or natural feeling to create strong families, right? But he had that sense of strong family, protecting his children, because of his mother, who was the matriarch of his family. They really influenced us. And so we don't give Black women enough credit for being the matriarch of our families, building up strong young Black men, regardless of the things that they go through. They do the best that they can in the situation and sometimes exceed expectations, right? So again, shout out to those matriarchs like Dr. Alberta King. I call her doctor, the Alberta Williams King, right? For the things that she was able to do and what she instilled in her son, Dr. King, right? Saying you are as good as anyone, right? And at this time, Dr. King goes on to say, mother had no idea that the little boy in her arms would years later be involved in the struggle against the system she was speaking of. But see, this is where I may have to differ with Dr. King. I believe his mother did see that coming on the horizon. And had she told you, that would have been your fate, or she would have told you that would have been, you may not would have walked that path, but she prepared you for it. Even when you didn't see it, she prepared you for it. That's the power of the matriarch, right? As Martin Luther King Jr. and his assemblies grew up, King continued to set examples for them in other ways. She founded the Ebenezer Choir and played the organ at the church starting in the 1930s, received a Bachelor's of Art from Morris Brown College in 1938, and involved herself in organizations like the NAACP and the YMCA. Though soft-spoken and reserved and most comfortable out of the spotlight, Alberta King also offered support to her son as his national prominence grew in the 1950s and 1960s. As the King Institute notes, she was a pillar of strength for the entire family when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. Sadly, the King's family tragedies didn't end there, and Alberta Williams King would soon meet the same fate as her son. How Alberta Williams King died at the hands of a gunman. Here she is here, sitting with Coretta Scott King, sitting with her father, Michael King, with Dr. King's father, Michael King, at Dr. King's funeral, at his memorial service. By the time Alberta Williams King showed up at Ebenezer Church on June 30th, 1974, she had suffered a number of tragedies. Alongside the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, she also lost her youngest son, A.D. King, who drowned in his pool in 1969. And I'm going to get into that later, but I didn't have the information to really get into that. But if you really start getting into the circumstances of his drowning, that's also questionable. It's also questionable. His drowning in his own pool. The brother of Martin Luther King. Many people don't know that, right? And on that fateful day in 1974, she'd lose her own life to a gunman. As The Guardian describes it, King was playing the Lord's Prayer on the organ when a 23-year-old black man named Marcus Wayne Chenault Jr. leapt to his feet in the front of the church, pulled out a gun and screamed, "You must stop this. I am tired of all of this. I am taking over this morning." Wielding two pistols, he fired into the choir, hitting Alberta King, the church deacon Edward Boykin, and an elderly female parishioner. "I'm going to kill everyone in here," the gunman reportedly cried as members of the church piled on top of him. Alberta Williams King was rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital, but the 69-year-old had sustained a fatal wound to the head. She and Deacon Boykin, died shortly after the attack, stunning their congregation and their families. "It was without question the worst day of my life," King's daughter, Christine Kings Ferris, said, according to Atlanta Magazine. "I thought I had made it through the worst days of my life. I was wrong." According to the New York Times, and then this is where we really get into the crust of this presentation, right? According to the New York Times, King's killer had become convinced that all Christians were his enemies. He later explained that he'd gone to Atlanta out of a hatred for black ministers and had hoped to kill Martin Luther King Sr. But Alberta King was simply closer. That also sounds sketchy. You really went there to kill Mr. King Sr., but you decided that because Alberta King was closer, that was the better shot for you. A direct shot to the head. I believe Alberta King was his actual target, and not, as the New York Times reported, Dr. King's father, Michael King. Because we know Alberta King, again, who had lost a son to a questionable drowning at his own home in the pool, lost her son, Martin Luther King, the most prominent civil rights leader of still of our day and time, of this age. I believe they were afraid that in looking at both of her sons, that Alberta King had created a formula to create and raise up black messiahs. She had a formula. Though his lawyers argue he was insane, Chenault was found guilty and sentenced to death. His sentence was later reduced to life in prison, in part because of a campaign led by the King family. Alberta's King family has described her as a crucial part of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, someone who explained the world to him, instilled him with self-respect, and altogether acted as an important role model. Every now and then I have to chuckle as I realize there are people who actually believe Martin just appeared out of nowhere or just appeared. Alberta King's daughter wrote in her memoir, Through It All, they think he simply happened, that he appeared fully formed, without context, ready to change the world. Take it from his big sister, that's simply not the case. After reading about Alberta King, peruse these surprising facts and different things. And that's the article. And the reason why I wanted to read through that is to simply show that even his sisters and everyone, his sister and everyone around the King family understood that the matriarch Alberta King is the reason, maybe not the sole reason, but he spoke highly of his father. But also she was the formula, the driving force, the mixture of this civil rights leader, this black messiah that we see. And I believe this is why she was assassinated, as to not be able to reproduce, not biologically, but to teach the concepts, the understanding, the family structure, the intelligence, how to choose and how to support and uplift the black man, creating many more black messiahs. This is why she was assassinated. Let's continue. And this is a picture of Alberta King here, as well as Coretta Scott King. This is Bob Fish Photography Archive, Stanford University Libraries. An autobiography of religious development, right? These are the letters of Dr. King, which you can see at the King Institute. I want to read something else. I want to show y'all what we knew about Alberta Williams King and her influence in creating the Black Messiah, Dr. King. So this is the King Institute, Stanford University Archives, an autobiography of religious development written by Dr. King while at Crozier Theological Seminary, dated between September 1950 and November 1950. Let's talk about what he says here. In the revealing essay written for Davis' course, The Religious Development of Personality, King reviews the influences of his family and church on his religious beliefs. King recalls a nurturing family life. This is important, family. We often want to know, why don't we see these types of Black messiahs constantly coming up, constantly standing up today? Well, they figured out that you have to start, the nucleus of that Black Messiah has to start with a strong family nucleus. Shalom, Yirmiyahu. Peace to you, family. It begins with a strong family nucleus, and just bear with me. I have to set this up so we can get to the meat of it, right? I have to set this up as to understanding that our brother Williams King developed an actual formula to create a black messiah, and this is why, according to my research, and what I'm postulating, this is why she was assassinated, because she had created this formula of how to develop black messiahs, right? King recalls a nurturing family closely interwoven with activity, Shalakia, in his father's church, which conditioned him to be optimistic about human nature. It is quite easy for me to think of a God of love, King writes, mainly because I grew up in a family where love was central and where lovely relationships were ever present. That's part of the formula, family, in creating a black messiah. King relates seminal events in his religious development, including his baptism into the church at age 7 and his call to the ministry while in college. He attributes the decision to become a minister to his father's noble example. Despite their theological differences, King retains his admiration for a real father. He also recounts 2 formative experiences: the shock of a childhood confrontation with racism and the death of his grandmother. Davis marked the paper excellent. King writes, my birthplace was Atlanta, Georgia, the capital of the state and the so-called gateway to the South. I was born in the late 20s on the verge of the Great Depression, which was to spread its disastrous arms into every corner of this nation for over a decade. Let me say this, people. We often talk about poverty in the black community and how poverty's reach has created an environment that now we see in our black community. Many single parent homes and fatherless children, and which is, which oftentimes the statistics on that is skewed, right? They try to make it to demonize black men, but it's simply not the case among any other group or race of men. Black men are more involved in their children's education, are more involved in care for their children. So to demonize the black man for not being there, right? Because we have a higher percentage of single parent households, that argument you can't really have, right? The statistics don't line up with that, right? But King being born and growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, at the cusp of the Great Depression, right? Where not just black folks were poor, but white folks were poor. There was a lot of poverty around, right? But that did not stop his mother, Alberta Williams King, from instilling in them, as well as their father, instilling in them principles of good character, teaching and training and raising her children, right, to be good students, to read, right, promoting education in their homes, right, teaching them the scripture, right, not dealing with the dogma per se, but dealing with the principles, as the scripture talks about, desiring a good name. Right? There's a saying, methods are many, principles are few. Methods always change, but principles never do. I'm gonna say that again. Methods are many. Principles are few. Methods always change, but principles never do. And the principles that we find in the Torah and the works that are built on the Torah and even in the Quran to a degree, the principles that we find when most people talk about or try to attack these Abrahamic faiths, the principles that are found in these texts are the basis of building grand and great character, are the basis of what you would need to have in order to have a Black Messiah. It's a part of the formula. The loving of the family, the instilling of the principles found in the Bible and in the Torah. These principles are needed for the foundation of creating a true Black Messiah. These are the things we need to have when looking for these things. And so in dealing with this, what we really want to get into and why I wanted to bring this out is to show the influence of the power of the matriarch in the Black family, as it should be. This creates the Black Messiah. These are the building blocks for it. And in our Black communities, we've gotten away from that power that the matriarchs once wielded. We see this in Proverbs 31. We see the matriarch, the mother of the king of King Lemuel, teaching him how to recognize and choose a wife. And she's giving him examples based on the things that she does, that she's doing. Proverbs chapter 31, a virtuous woman. The power of the matriarch is so crucial to building and strengthening the core of the Black family. Without it, you don't have the necessary building blocks for Black Messiah. It cannot happen. It cannot happen. It cannot happen. But I needed to bring that out so that we can understand that Alberta Christine Williams King developed a formula to create a Black Messiah. Right? So let's get into it. Right? Next slide. Go beyond that one. Next slide. And let's get into this here, right? We're just sharing information here. The 1974 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother. All right, let me go back and deal with it. Let me see what I got. Here we go. Right. The 1974 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother, right? We're just going to read some things here, right? Many are aware of the U.S. government-directed conspiracy to assassinate Martin Luther King Jr. The James Earl Ray lone nut killer narrative has been thoroughly rebutted, most notably in the 1999 wrongful death suit brought by the King family against Lloyd Jowers. In their verdict, the jury found that governmental agencies were party to the conspiracy to murder Martin Luther King Jr. Less known is his mother likely suffered a similar violent fate at the hands of MK Ultra mind-controlled assassin. Now, listen, family, this is the no friend zone. Not friend, fringe. No fringe theories here. No conspiracy theories here. We're talking about things that we know and we could substantiate. Right? So Alberta King was shot and killed on June 30th, 1974 by 23-year-old Marcus Wayne Chenault as she sat at the organ at the Ebenezer Baptist Church during the Sunday service. He wounded 3 people, 2 of them, Mrs. King and Deacon Edward Boykin, 69, were fatally shot and killed. According to the New York Times, Chenault told the police that his mission, listen, family, that his mission was to kill the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., but he shot Mrs. King instead because she was close to him. Now, either that's a failed mission, or it's just it's simply not true, right? Interestingly, Alberta King's life was taken only a few months before James Earl Ray's evidentiary hearing to determine whether or not he would be granted a new trial. And see, I also believe that Dr. King had confided some things to his mother and his father as well, some things that he may have been privy to in regards to these assassinations attempts and the government interference. And they know that we're being the COINTELPRO program, and we're going to get into that. They were being surveilled. Not just Dr. King, they were being followed. Not just Dr. King, they were being eavesdropped on. Not just Dr. King, but everyone in his inner circle, especially his family and especially his mother. Again, and part of the COINTELPRO and part of this, and they mentioned it earlier here, this M Ultra K mind control program that was really ran by the CIA. They really wanted to get into the psychology of individuals. And so they wanted to understand, again, as I said earlier, the psychological makeup of a Black Messiah, of Dr. King. They want to understand, how did he become the great galvanizer, the great leader that he was today? They wanted to understand, how does this Negro, in the face of death and all adversity, facing attempting to bribe him? They couldn't throw enough money at him. They couldn't throw enough women at him to get him to sell out his people. And I know the argument oftentimes is that Dr. King sold us out, but there's no evidence to that. That's simply contrarian rhetoric, disinformation. But they wanted to know what was the basis and the foundation of his strength. They knew that he had these things before he met his wife. He had the seeds of this burgeoning. They knew it before he got to Coretta Scott King, and peace be upon her for and blessings to her for her influence and support of her husband. But they wanted to know what made King who he was. And what they found out was that it was his mother, Alberta King, the matriarch of his family, who molded and shaped his understanding of the world today, how to fight against segregation, how to fight against racism and white supremacy, how to deal intellectually, how to strategize, how to be strategic. Think twice, speak once. Listen. Right? These things he gained and garnered from his mother. So she had the formula for creating the Black Messiah. And if you listen to Dr. King, the first thing that he talks about was an overwhelmingly amount of nurturing and care and love that was shown towards him by his grandmother as well as his mother. as well as his father as well. So these things are the nucleuses of a black Messiah, right? Let's continue reading. The FBI maintained wiretaps on the King family and the SCLC for some time after ML King Jr.'s assassination. This is what I mean, family. With mounting evidence of the government's involvement in the killing, the guilty parties had plenty of reason to be fearful of one of MLK Jr.'s parents going public or possibly speaking in Ray's defense. The last thing those bastards needed was a tag team consisting of MLK Jr.'s mourning widow and his grieving mother or father blanking in the airwaves and exposing the FBI's murderous COINTELPRO shenanigans. And here's a picture, right, of Marcus Chenault. Just take a look at that, family. I just want y'all to take a look at this picture, right? And then I want to read this. It says Marky, as he called, was born quite different from his brothers and sisters. All of Marky's family members were associated with the branches of the United States Armed Forces. Marky was too short and nearsighted to qualify for any type of military service. Some reports that he was about 5'3", maybe even shorter. The senior Chenault, his father, was a long-term employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's, AEC. Now, mind you, he didn't come from a poor family. He didn't come from an intelligent family. As we were saying earlier, most of his siblings or all of his siblings were in the armed forces. His father worked at the Atomic Energy Commission, or MOUND, or the Mounds Laboratory in Miamisburg, Ohio, 15 miles south of Dayton. The Mounds Lab was part of the S Factor, Stanford Research Institute, SRI, former SRI and AEC director, CIA, MK Ultra director, John Alex McCone. Y'all starting to see the connections to Chenault, right? With his MK Ultra and the CIA. Formed the Mounds Laboratory on approximately 360 acres in 1948. These are the people his father worked for. His brothers and sisters were part of the military. His brother, I don't know about his sister, but his siblings were part of the military. But his father worked for the people who were running the CIA, who had ran the CIA, also the MK Ultra program under John Alex McCone. The Mounds Laboratory on approximately 360 acres in 1948. There's concrete evidence that electronic mind control was an object of extensive study, research, and experimentation at the Stanford Research Institute, as exposed by the Washington Post on August 7, 1977. So if you want to read about this, there's a source, the Washington Post, August 7, 1977. Now, mind you, this is years after King's assassination, years after the assassination of Alberta King, when this information came out. Before the assassination of Miss King and Deacon Boyd, witnesses said that Markey went through numerous personality changes, One day he was an anti-communist. The next day he was a Christian. But he hated Christians. That's why he killed it, right? That's what they told you, right? That's what they told us. One day he was a Muslim, then a Jew. And the next day he was a homosexual. One day he was a flaming black militant. The next day he was very lonely and withdrawn. Someone was switching poor Marky off and on into entirely different and distinct personalities. Marky was a real life Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde case. When he had been arrested, police asked Marky about a long scar on his skull. Marky had no recollection of the scar and where it had come from. Marky had undergone some type of unknown, remarkable, invasive brain surgery that he couldn't recall. When asked if he killed anyone, Chenault could not remember. He responded, accepting responsibility for the homicides with unbelievable glee and joy. Smiling, he said, "I assume I did. I assume I shot someone." During arraignment on murder charges, Chenault referred to himself in an alter personality, a Hebrew, and gave the name of the alter personality to the court as servant Jacob. And I want to pause right there. So there's your connection, and it goes a little bit further than this, and I'll show you. But here's your first instance of him even attributing himself to being in Hebrew, right? And he says, "I'm a servant of Jacob. That is my name, servant of Jacob." But as clearly we've seen, he was a Muslim one day, a Christian one day, a homosexual one day, a black militant one day. This guy's mind was all over the place, right? So for those to say, like Dr.Reggy assumes, and the propaganda and the disinformation that we hear, that this guy was a black Hebrew Israelite or that he was an Israelite, you can't really make that claim. As this guy suffered from many different personalities, which is what we call today schizophrenia. And we're going to get into that to see if he was even actually diagnosed with schizophrenia, right? An actual diagnosis of schizophrenia. So any day, he could have been a Muslim. He could have been a black Hebrew Israelite. But why did they harp on him saying that he was an Israelite, just in Hebrew, when they know he attributed many different times to being a Christian, to being a Muslim, to being a black militant, to being a homosexual, different and distinct personalities? This was known. Why did they park their car on the Hebrew Israelite movement? Right? So let's go forward. Chenault was observed to be biting and licking his lips and clasping his hands repetitively. Right? When asked about the shooting, Wayne responded, "I'm a Hebrew and will sit here on a mission, and is partially accomplished." Marky had been sent on a mission from some God, packaged and pre-programmed to kill. Jacob in Hebrew is also called Israel. In the Bible, Jacob had an ongoing rivalry with his twin brother Esau. That struggle originated in the womb, leading their mother Rebekah to seek a divine oracle from which she learned that the younger Jacob would rule over his brother. This reference is important in understanding Chenault's programming, in that alter servant Jacob was programmed to rule over the mind, body, personality of Wayne Chenault. Right? Is there any credence to that? That he was programmed? That he was programmed? That he was under the influence of some type of mind control? We already see that his father worked for the director who was once a director of the CIA and over the MK Ultra mind control program. We also see that Chenault, the person, Marcus Wayne Chenault, the person that assassinated Alberta King, suffered clearly from schizophrenia. I hear some saying, was there a diagnosis of schizophrenia? We're going to get into that. Markey violently spat in the faces of his mother and father. And this is what I mean, right? It says, during his sentencing to the death penalty of capital murder, Markey violently spat in the faces of his mother and father. That doesn't sound like a practicing Hebrew Israelite. Honor thy mother and thy father. He wasn't keeping the law, statutes, and commandments. Not doing that. Not committing murder. Thou shalt not murder. Disrespecting and dishonoring your parents. Clearly says he spat in their faces. So he clearly wasn't walking and keeping these laws, man. He wasn't doing that. Anybody can claim to be an Hebrew Israelite. Anybody. Right? Watch this. I always wonder why until the dots were connected to John McCone, DCI of the CIA, director of the CIA, MK Ultra, Mounds Weapons Laboratory, and the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Right? The Mounds Lab was a nuclear weapons and light arms facility. The Mounds Lab had many business partnerships and personnel connection with Betchel, Kaiser McCone, Monsanto, the same Monsanto that we're dealing with today when it deals with our food. Same Monsanto, and SRI, right? The Stanford Research Institute. Additionally, there were some secret operations conducted at Mounds Lab by Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Wright-Patterson Base was involved in recruiting bright young geniuses to an attempt to break through in Tesla technology. Wright-Patterson had been the home base for some of the most ardent Operation Paperclip Nazi SSS scientists. Tesla technologies involved electromagnetic frequencies mind control that the SSS was interested in perfecting and exploiting. Markey had been linked to a group of black mind control assassins, the Troop, being run out of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Markey and the Troop hit list target most of Americans leading black religious and spiritual leaders straight out of COINTELPRO, right? Let me see here. And that's it. And so some are maybe saying, well, how does this information really connect? Do we have really good, solid information to make this connection? Well, let's talk about it. All right. Dealing with J. Edgar Hoover and COINTELPRO. People like, share, subscribe if you already haven't. And this is FBI sets goals for COINTELPRO. We're talking about the Black Hebrew Israelite connection to the assassination of Alberta Williams King. It says, under Director J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI's COINTELPRO counterintelligence program was aimed at investigating and disrupting dissident political groups within the United States. In the 1960s, COINTELPRO's targets frequently included civil rights activists, both those who espoused nonviolence, like Martin Luther King Jr., and those that Hoover referred to as black nationalist hate groups, like the Black Panthers. This document outlines the program's goals in attempting to limit the effectiveness of such groups. In practice, the FBI used infiltration, legal harassment, disinformation. I'm telling you about these disinformation cell groups that's still alive and well, especially in the conscious community, especially over on HOK. Disinformation and sometimes extra legal intimidation and violence against King, the Panthers, and other black activist groups in its attempt to discredit and disrupt them. What were their goals? For maximum effectiveness, of the counterintelligence program and to prevent wasted effort, long-range goals is being set. Number one, prevent the coalition of militant black national groups, right? And if you understand on this particular time, that would have included the Black Hebrew Israelite camps. That would have included those things such as the commandment keepers and such things as um, the original ISUPK. I can't recall the original name. So during that same time, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. In unity, there is strength. A truism that is no less valid for all its triteness. An effective coalition of black nationalist groups might be the first step towards a real Mau Mau or black revolutionary army in America. This is what they were afraid of, family. The beginning of a true black revolution. Number two, to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad, peace be upon him, all aspire to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less, peace be upon him, is less of a threat because of his age. King could be a very real contender for this position should he abandon his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines, nonviolence, and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. Prevent violence on the part of black nationalist groups. This is of primary importance and is, of course, a goal of our investigative activity. It should also be a goal for a counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, to pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them before. What do you think they mean by that? Neutralizing them. Assassinations, false imprisonment. Neutralize them before they exercise their potential for violence. Prevent militant black national groups and leaders from gaining respectability. These disinformation campaigns, slander your character. Right? These are the things we need to deal with. Right? I'm sorry, I'm not sharing this tab. Let me share so y'all can see what I'm reading. Prevent militant black national groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them to three separate segments of the community. Shalom, y'all down. Shalom to the Argument Men's League. Peace to you, Lance. Hey, send me your information, Lance. I've been trying to reach you, family. Afro-Asiatic 19 facts, brother. Facts. Indigenous black man, exactly. Bill Gates and Monsanto. Like, this stuff goes way back, man. We know William Gates, Bill Gates' father, was one of the foundings and one of the founding heads of today what is called Planned Parenthood. Bill Gates' father. So make no mistake about it. It's not a stretch for me for us to believe and understand that Bill Gates was delivering sterilization drugs under the disguise of immunizations to children in Africa. He's been talking about depopulation since he took over depopulation from his father, William Gates Sr. We know these things. Exactly, the GMO seeds and Roundup bug killer, giving people lymphoma. Like, we understand these things, right? So these things are not conspiracies to the degree where they hold no substantial weight or basis of fact. These are things that we know to be true. So we're not talking about here fringe theorists or fringe theories or pseudoscience. We're not talking about that. We're talking about actual documented scientific evidence, eyewitness evidence of these things taking place here. We're talking about the Black Hebrew Israelite connection to the assassination of Alberta Williams King. Who's really behind it? As I said earlier, this goes beyond just dealing with an answer to Dr.Reggy's stating that the Black Hebrew Israelites has to answer. We need to answer for the assassination of Alberta Williams King. No, we don't. We don't have to answer for that. We don't have to answer for that. If you would have studied, actually gotten into the information and presented the information instead of going on the disinformation campaign as you do over on the HOK with this information. This is the information you should have been talking about the government involvement and continuing to kill and destroy and to squash the uprising of a Black Messiah in our communities. This is still going on today. Right? But you just want to beat up the Bible so bad. You can't even get the truth out your mouth. Right? It says you must discredit those groups of individuals to first the responsible Negro community. Right? Second, they must be discredited to the white community. So that's interesting. Their goal was to first discredit these so-called potential Black messiahs to Black folks first before they went to the white folks. Why? Because their struggle is not our struggle. So their theory is that us coming together as a community. They're in fear of Mau Mau or Black Revolution. They're still afraid of that in this country today. So we have to understand that the things that we often hear in these disinformation cell groups, specifically like on the HOK and other platforms as well, that when you hear things like, well, see, Black Hebrew Israelites, y'all got to tell us why y'all responsible for killing Dr. King's mother. What? What are you talking about? What benefit would we have in killing Dr. King's mother? I want to get into this information. I really want to get all the way through this because it's very interesting here. But we understand that COINTELPRO and some of their goals: dismantle the Black community, discredit our Black leaders, right? Create disinformation campaigns, against those at the time of Malcolm X, Dr. King, Elijah Muhammad, peace be upon him. And as they said here, the only reason why they didn't assassinate Elijah Muhammad is because of his age, and they didn't feel like he could move any further. He wouldn't live long enough to see a Black Revolutionary Army come to fruition. But Malcolm X and Dr. King and Medgar Evers, Fred Hampton, Angela Davis, these people had the youth and the wherewithal. And see, we have to understand that as well. This is where revolution comes from. This is where a revolution is born. It's born among the youth. And then they could discredit that, keep us down, keep us sedated mentally, confuse us, have us going and bickering against each other, dividing us over religious beliefs. Right? The New Testament talks about that in the during the end times, the times when we shall see a lot of these things began to come together. That you would see father against son and daughters against mothers. What is that saying? You would see divisions among families. And not just divisions among families, but divisions among communities. These things will begin to happen, right? And we see this almost every day. Number 4, prevent militant black national groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them to 3 separate segments of the community. The goal of discrediting black nationalists must be handled tactically in 3 ways. You must discredit those groups and individuals to, first, the responsible Negro community. Second, they must be discredited to the white community, both the responsible community and to liberals who have vestiges of sympathy for black militant, black nationalists, simply because they are Negroes. Third, these groups must be discredited in the eyes of Negro radicals, the followers of the movement. Make your leaders look bad. Tell them that they're con artists and thieves. And listen, when I hear people, especially in this unconscious community, it burns me when they talk about Dr. King and how he didn't get us anywhere, and Malcolm X, how he didn't get us anywhere, and Medgar Evers, how they didn't get us anywhere. See, Dr. King said he led us into a burning house. That was not the context of that speech. That he had deceived the people. Right? So we have to understand the things that are going on and taking place here, right? So again, it says this last area requires entirely different tactics from the first 2. Publicity about violent tendencies. We often hear that in the news. We hear it in the news. And then we further it in our music. Not too long ago, on the Breakfast Club, there was a white music executive. And they were questioning him about the violent lyrics in rap music today, drill music, whatever. And if he felt any need, or if he felt any way that they should remove this detrimental type music, this idea of promoting death, drugs, guns, rape, prostitution in the music that our children listen to. They asked him if he felt any type of way of allowing this music to be played over the airwaves. And his answer was simply this: no. He said no. This is on the Breakfast Club about maybe 2 months ago. White radio is there. He said, no, I don't have anything. He said, listen, my children got to eat too. I'm telling you, this was what he was saying. He said, look, my children got to eat too. And if this is how I make money for my children to feed my family, then I don't care how much y'all call y'all women bitches and hoes. and how much y'all talk about y'all gonna shoot each other up at the club, and how much y'all gonna and how much y'all talk about y'all hate this person and hate that person. I could care less. Y'all buying it. Somebody listening to it. It must resonate with somebody. Hell no, I don't. I need y'all to keep doing that, to keep making me millions of dollars, so I can keep feeding my family while I watch y'all destroy yourself. Meanwhile, they ask them, "Do you allow your children to listen to it?" Oh, hell no! You crazy? Like, what kind of psychosis are we dealing with here, people? Right. The fifth and the last goal of COINTELPRO, a final goal should be to prevent the long-range growth of militant black organizations, especially among youth. Specific tactics to prevent these groups from converting young people must be developed. So it's not a surprise to me that during this time, COINTELPRO, and the time that Marcus Chenault is charged with the assassination and murder of Alberta William King, the mother of Dr. Martin Luther King, that at the same time, there's a burgeoning group of people in New York that are establishing and making its prominence in New York. The Black Hebrew Israelites, the One West groups, that they are now growing in numbers at this same particular time. That now COINTELPRO and the FBI is looking at them as one of these growing black militant groups among the youth that must be stopped from converting young black people to their understanding. So it's not a stretch for me or for me to understand why we now see this man Marcus Chenault, who's clearly disturbed and clearly needs psychological help, and at this point who clearly seems to be under some type of influence. We've already made the connection of his father working for the Atomic Energy Commission in Ohio, ran by the same director, Cohn, who was over the CIA MK Ultra program, which dealt with mind control tactics. We clearly see the connection there. You see what I'm saying? So these are the things that we have to keep abreast of. P. Shankara, Bishop. Exactly, Afro-Asiatic. They feel the spirit of Joshua rising in our youth, but they cannot stop it. Hallelujah. They cannot stop it. So this is what I'm saying. These are the things that they see. So it's not a stretch for me to understand why the Black Hebrew Israelites are being mentioned and being demonized and being pointed to as being responsible for the assassination of Alberta Williams King during that time in 1974, because we clearly see this is when the group is coming now up at its height. It's growing in New York. The One West groups are growing. That radical black movement, militant movement, part of the Black Hebrew Israelites, is now a growing sector, which now has is on the radar. They're on the map with the CIA and the FBI, because it's a youth movement being developed there among the Black Hebrew Israelites. So to squash it and to discredit it and to put it down before they can see a rise or the next Black Messiah to come to fruition, they have to discredit it. So what do? They discredit it, just like what they said right here. Look, it says the goal of discrediting Black nationalism must be handled tactically in three ways. You must discredit those groups and individuals too. First, the responsible Negro community. Second, they must be discredited to the white community. And then watch this third one. The third, these groups must be discredited in the eyes of Negro radicals, the followers of the movement. This last area requires entirely different tactics from the first two. Publicity about violent tendencies and radical statements merely enhance Black nationalists to the last group. It adds respectability in a different way. They had to put it down. They had to put it down. And so they had to turn the narrative of the Black Hebrew Israelites against the Christians. And saying, see, Chenault said he hated Christians. You Black Christians, he hates you Black Christians, so he goes in and he shoots up some Black Christians because he's a Black Hebrew Israelite. He had to shoot up you Black Christians. But they're telling you this is a part of their disinformation campaign. This is their whole point of doing this. Absolutely, Sankara. Because in this, they also mention here Elijah Muhammad. And the reason why they didn't go after Elijah Muhammad is because of his age at the time. But we clearly saw this with Malcolm X and the dissension among the Nation of Islam. We know these were CIA and COINTELPRO and FBI operatives. The two men that were accused of shooting Malcolm X were exonerated for it. Based on what? The deathbed confession of one of the investigators who was an informant who was working on the case, with the FBI and the CIA, said, look, we know those two gentlemen you guys have locked up for Malcolm X's murder had nothing to do with it. And they were released based on the deathbed confession of this white guy. So we know this is what they were doing. We know this is what they were doing. And so we have to understand, Dr. Reggie, when you put these things out, these disinformation campaigns out against the Black Hebrew Israelites or Israelites in the community, that we're responsible for the death and the murder and the assassination of Alberta Williams King, you're not processing the information properly. You're not being honest. You're not even studying. You're not even reading. Your whole point is to do exactly what COINTELPRO does, and that's discredit any Black militant movement or any Black movement that stands up against the white establishment and the white hegemony in this country. They have you pointing fingers. The Israelites pointing fingers at the Muslims pointing fingers at the Israelites pointing fingers at the Christians. Y'all all Black. This is what they do. This is what they do. So we have to understand these things and stray away from these disinformation campaigns in the community. I want to get down to some of this, man, because some of this stuff is good. I want to read some of this as well. This is just a Wikipedia. Share my screen on that. Right. And then go and they talk about COINTELPRO, the route from the counterintelligence program that went from 1956 to 1971. And if anybody studies this whole COINTELPRO thing, you know that it even extended further beyond what they claim in 1971, right? It was a series of covert and illegal projects actively conducted by the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic American political organizations. FBI records show COINTELPRO resources targeted groups and individuals the FBI deemed subversive, including feminist organizations, the Communist Party USA, anti-Vietnam War organizers, activists of the civil rights and Black Power movements, Martin Luther King Jr., the Nation of Islam, and the Black Panther Party, environmentalists and animal rights organizations, the American Indian Movement, the Chicano and Mexican American groups like the Brown Berets and United Farm Workers Independence movements, including Puerto Rican independence groups such as the Young Lords and the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, a variety of organizations that were part of the broader New Left and white supremacist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan and the far-right group National States' Rights Party. In 1971 in San Diego, the FBI financed, armed, and controlled an extreme right-wing group, former members of the Minutemen anti-communist paramilitary organization, transforming it into a group called the Secret Army Organization that targeted groups, activists, and leaders involved in the anti-war movement using both intimidation and violent acts. Let me do this one here. Beginning in 1969, leaders of the Black Panther Party were targeted by COINTELPRO and neutralized by being what? Assassinated, imprisoned, publicly humiliated, or falsely charged with crimes. Some of the Black Panthers targeted included Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, Zaid Shakur, Geronimo Pratt, Mumai Abdul-Jamal, and Marshall Conway. Common tactics used by COINTELPRO were perjury, witness harassment, witness intimidation, and withholding of exculpatory evidence, right? Things that could exonerate them when they were being falsely charged with crime, keeping information out that could set them free or exonerate them. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover issued directives governing COINTELPRO, ordering FBI agents to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of these movements, especially their leaders. Under Hoover, the agent in charge, COINTELPRO, was William C. Sullivan. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, you'll see that, personally authorized some of the programs, giving written approval for limited wiretapping of Martin Luther King Jr.'s phones on a trial basis for a month or so. Hoover extended the clearance so his men were unshackled to look for evidence in areas of King's life they deemed worthy. There's something else down here I wanted to read real quick. Something else I wanted to read. Amidst the urban unrest of July, August 1977, the FBI began COINTELPRO Black Hate, which focused on King and the SCLC, as well as the Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee, SNCC, which was a young people movement, the Revolutionary Action Movement, the Deacons for Defense and Justice, Congress of Racial Equality Corps, and the Nation of Islam. Black Hate established the Ghetto Informant Program, was an intelligence gathering operation ran by the FBI from 1967 to 1973. Its official purpose was to collect information pertaining to riots and civil unrest. Through GIP, the FBI used more than 7,000 people to infiltrate poor Black people. Wow. And instructed 23 FBI officers to disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of Black nationalist hate type organizations. You got to understand what they were doing, people, and are still doing today. And that's COINTELPRO. I wanted to kind of get through some more of this, so let me go back. Now I want to get into Chenault versus the state. Right? And this is the Supreme Court of Georgia, argued February 11, 1975, decided April 9th, 1975. Rehearing denied April 22nd, 1975. I want to get into the breakdown of Chenault's case. Exactly, said Carl. According to Dr.Reggy's argument, he would have to include the cosmetics. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I want to get into Chenault's case, right? Because I really want to try to tie in these connections, right? So let's go here. Share this tab. Okay. So this is the Chenault versus state, right? Supreme Court of Georgia, 1975, decided on April 9th, hearing denied. Lewis R. Sladden, all that. Now let's read this, right? Because we're going to see some things where we're going to really start making the connections, right? To Chenault, and as we did earlier, with his father working for the Atomic Energy Commission in Cleveland, in Ohio, which was ran by the former CIA director James Cone, who was also over the CIA MK Ultra Mind Control program. So now we're less than 1 degrees. We're less than 1 degrees of separation away, so to speak, right? Between the Ultra MK program and Marcus Chenault. We're only 1 degree of separation away from making that connection. Watch this, family. This case is before this court by appeal for mandatory review of the death sentence imposed upon the appellant following his jury by trial. The appellant, Marcus Wayne Chenault, was indicted on July 9, 1974 by a Fulton County grand jury for the murders of Miss Alberta King and Deacon Edwin Boykin for aggravated assault for the shooting of Miss Jimmy Mitchell, for carrying a pistol without a license, and for carrying a concealed weapon, all on June 30, 1974. Following a jury trial which began on September 9, 1974, the jury found that the appellant guilty on all charges on September 12, 1974, and imposed sentences of death on both counts of murder and 10 years in the penitentiary for aggravated assault to run consecutively with the death sentences. The trial judge sentenced the appellant to 1 year in the penitentiary on both misdemeanor pistol counts to run concurrently with all other sentences opposed, right? Factual situation. We're talking about the state's case, Chenault versus the state, right? This is a Supreme Court appeal. It says the state presented evidence. Shalom to you, Marquis the Samaritan. Shalom to you, family. The state presented evidence to establish the following. About 7:30 a.m. Listen, family, I want y'all to listen to this, right? Because we're going to connect this right here, right? That's why I wanted to go into his actual court case documents, right? So his Supreme Court case documents. So about 7:30 a.m. on the morning of June 30th, 1974, a taxi cab driver picked up Marcus Wayne Chenault, the appellant, at the bus station in Atlanta, Georgia. He asked to be taken to the Ebenezer Church, right? He was taken to the church. Chenault asked whether or not Mr. and Mrs. King, mother and father of the late Dr. Martin Luther King, attended Ebenezer Baptist Church Sunday. First of all, now we have one of our first counter arguments to people saying that, oh, my mission was to kill only Michael King Sr. and not Mrs. King, but I only shot Mrs. King because she was the closest to me. So my mission was to shoot Dr. King and not Mrs. King. But here in the Supreme Court records, right, Chenault versus the state, it says Chenault asks, and this is on the cab driver's testimony. Chenault asks whether or not Mr. and Mrs. King, mother and father of the late Dr. King attended Ebenezer Church every Sunday. So we clearly see that he had intentions, whatever they may have been, was focused on both the father, Michael King Sr., as well as Alberta King. So he was going with the expectation of encountering and confronting them both. See, that's the first counter argument against, oh, he only his based on his supposed alleged testimony that he only was seeking to kill King Sr. But the cab driver testifies he asked about both King Sr. and the mother and Alberta King. This is why I say I believe that part of his Ultra MK programming and his COINTELPRO counterintelligence was to also assassinate Alberta Williams King more so than the senior, because it is her that Dr. King attributed to his development and his shaping of him becoming the person who he was, that leader, that charismatic leader, that person who's able to galvanize millions, that formula for the Black Messiah that she instilled in him. This is what they wanted to understand, the psychology of that, and how do you create a Black Messiah through all the things that they were throwing at them in the face of adversity. They wanted to know, what was she cooking up? How was she creating, even in the face of the questionable drowning of her other son, A.D. King, who allegedly drowned in his own pool in 1969, which is also questionable because the coroner's report, and I'll bring that out at a later point, the coroner's report on Dr. King's brother, A.D., is insufficient, or whether or not he was dead before water entered his lungs. They believe, from my understanding in my research, they believe that Dr. Alberta Williams King had a formula for creating, and when I say formula, how to raise Black, intelligent, strong men that would stand up against the system. Her being an activist herself at a young age, how they would stand up against racism and white supremacy, becoming great leaders in their communities, having a love for their people. Right? So later that morning, around 9:30 a.m., another taxi cab picked up the appellant at a motel and took him to the church. Right? So here again, he says at 7:30 a.m. on the morning of June 30th, the day Alberta Williams King was assassinated, a taxi driver picked up Marcus Wayne Chenault, the appellant, at the bus station in Atlanta, Georgia. He asked if he could be taken to Ebenezer Church. He was taken to the church at 7:30 that morning. Chenault asked whether or not both Mr. and Mrs. King, mother and father of the late Dr. King, attended Ebenezer Baptist Church every Sunday, right? That was at 7:30 that morning. Later that morning, around 9:30 a.m., another taxi cab picked up Marcus Wayne Chenault at a motel. So he left the church. He did some, and this is what I'm saying. He did some reconnaissance. This is a military tactic he's doing here. He went and did some reconnaissance to see if they would be there. His targets would be there at 7:30 that morning. He took a cab there to the church. He went actually to the church, according to the taxi cab driver. And then later on, another taxi cab driver 2 hours later says he picked up the appellant at a motel. So he goes to the church at 7:30 in the morning, does recon, look around the place, probably scoped it out, looked around, made sure that they were going to be attending that Sunday service. Then he leaves. Then he goes to where? A motel. And then another taxi cab driver picks him up at 9:30 at the motel and takes him to the church. It's a military tactic. Surveilling your targets. He's not military trained. Watch this. Appellant was observed seated alone in the main audience section of the Ebenezer Church and was invited to attend the men's adult Bible class of the Sunday school. He introduced himself and stated he was from Ohio. The appellant, or Chenault, was later observed seated in the Amen corner next to the organ after church services had begun. Which means, if you don't understand what the Amen corner is, it's a section of seats, a row of seats, seated next to, closer to the dais or the pulpit or the stage where the sermon is given. It's in that section. It's closer there, and people would be in there. They would call it the Amen corner because they would say, somebody say amen, and the preacher would point to that corner, and the group in that corner would say, amen, right? Pretty much exactly what it says. It says applicant was seated about 4 feet from the organ, and usher handed applicant Chenault a bulletin and exchanged greetings. During the worship service, a sound resembling an explosion was heard. Mr. Smith and usher had his attention drawn in the direction of the organ. He heard one of the victims, Mrs. Alberta King, exclaimed, "Oh!" Chenault was observed standing up with the pistol, exclaiming, "I am taking over this." He was close enough to Mrs. King to touch her. He was also firing more shots. Mrs. Jimmy Mitchell was near the appellant when the shooting began, because she was shot as well. She was wounded. Earlier, Chenault had asked whether or not Pastor King was in church, and Ms. Mitchell pointed Reverend King out. He didn't even know what he looked like. A few minutes later, Ms. Mitchell heard the explosion-like noise. She was also shot. Derek Barber King, grandson of Miss Alberta King, was sitting near the grandmother, while the organist, Miss King, was leading the congregation in the singing. The appellant began shooting with 2 pistols. Mr. King observed his grandmother being shot, screaming and bleeding. He saw the appellant shoot his grandmother again after she had fallen on the floor. It was assassination, family. Shot her in the head. She fell to the floor. He came over and shot her again. He observed the appellant shoot Deacon Edward Boykin and randomly shoot into the congregation. Other witnesses testified substantially the same. The appellant presented evidence to support a defense of insanity. This is what I want to get to right here. It says Chenault and his attorneys, he presented evidence to support a defense of insanity. What was that insanity? And this is what I want to get to right here. It says 2 psychiatrists testified that they diagnosed Chenault as a schizophrenic, paranoid type mental, with a paranoid type mental condition. So remember earlier when I read back that he was, from people around him was saying, from day to day, he could be a Jew, a Hebrew, a Christian, a Muslim, a homosexual. He had these different personalities, these different schizophrenic personalities. So he was just not walking around calling himself a Black Hebrew Israelite every single day. That was not the case, Dr. Reggy. This is what I mean about disinformation. These disinformation cell groups. We have to delve into the facts of this information, right? It says 2 psychiatrists testified. They diagnosed him as a schizophrenic, paranoid type. This right here, family, is important. This diagnosis here, this confirmed diagnosis of schizophrenia is important. Watch how that all ties in. Condition who was suffering from delusions of grandiosity. Psychiatric testimony comprised Chenault's sole defense. Enumerations of error, right? Let's see. The appellant filed a motion to stay the indictment for the purpose of presenting evidence of the appellant's sanity to the grand jury before the grand jury return an indictment of the appellant. Appellant or Chenault sought psychiatric examination by a competent physician and named the psychiatrist to perform the examination in his proposed order. The trial judge interpreted the motion to stay as a premature plea of insanity and properly ejected it under Code Section 27-1501, providing for special pleas and demurrers after an indictment is rendered. Excuse me. Shalakia. Appellant's motion for psychiatric evaluation was granted. After indictment, appellant filed no special plea of insanity. In the absence of a special plea of insanity, the trial court did more than was required by appointing psychiatrists for evaluation of a defendant, right? And they give the case law for that. It says appellant's plea of not guilty by reason of insanity raised only the general issue of the guilt of the appellant, including his insanity at the time of the acts charged as crimes, right? The determination was submitted to the jury under proper instructions. We know that although the mental condition of the appellant was the principal matter relied on by the defense, the psychiatric experts, one of whom was requested by the defense, testified as follows. Dr. Loyalty Backus, assistant professor of psychiatry and director of the Law and Psychiatry Service for Grady Hospital, right? Remember, that's the hospital that Alberta King was taken to when she was shot, right? For Grady Hospital, testified July 9th, 1974, and July 26, 1974. He examined the appellant 5 times for a total of 7 hours. He also interviewed the appellant's parents for approximately 4 hours. Dr. Backus diagnosed the appellant as having a schizophrenic mental condition, paranoid type. He was said to suffer from delusion of grandiosity. Appellant never indicated that he was controlled by any forces. The prognosis of the appellant was deemed good, meaning that with treatment, the appellant has the capacity to function adequately in society. He testified that there are many people in society that might be classified as paranoid schizophrenics. Dr. Backus asserted that the appellant in murdering Mrs. Alberta King and Deacon Edward Boykin had a cognitive awareness of and the ability to appreciate the implications of his act. He knew right from wrong. The doctor did not indicate any delusion that compelled the appellant to commit murder. Dr. Backus also testified that the appellant was competent to stand trial, that he knew what a prosecutor was, what a judge was, what a defense lawyer was, and what a trial was, and what the consequences were. And it goes on and on and on talking about these different things. Here's another psychiatrist's report. Dr. Alfred's report read into evidence indicated that the appellant was suffering from a condition known as paranoid schizophrenia. 2 psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, but was sufficiently free of mental defect, disease, or derangement as to be able to distinguish between right from wrong, was sufficiently free from mental defect, his ability to adhere to the right was not deprived. And this is important, right? And I'm going to show you why. Let's go back. Let's go back to our full presentation here, right? And see why that's important, right? We don't have to go through the summaries because we did do that. Let's go through this. Let's deal with this right here. It says Marcus Wayne Chenault emotional effect following the murder was unusual, grinning. He asked if he had hit anyone. He had reportedly been dropped off at the church by people he knew in Ohio. So this guy, they called him a cab driver, but actually the people that were driving him around and dropping him off these places, these are people that knew him, knew who he was. So while at Ohio State University, he was part of a group known as the Troop, run by a black minister, watch this, and gun collector who used the name Rabbi Emmanuel Israel. This where it starts getting really crazy right here. Exactly, Afro-Asiatic. Exactly. MK Ultra all over it. Watch this. Run by a black minister and gun collector who used the name Rabbi Emanuel Israel. This man described in the press as a mentor for Chenault. This is where the whole black Hebrew Israelite thing becomes into play at, right? And you're going to see that this guy here, Rabbi Emanuel Israel, this guy never existed. This is a character. This is a character playing a part. And I'm going to show you that, right? This man described in the press as a mentor for Chenault left the area immediately after the shooting. In the same period, Rabbi Hill traveled from Ohio to Guyana, and set up Hilltown using similar aliases and preaching the same message of a black Hebrew elite. Now, this Rabbi Emanuel Israel pops up out of nowhere. Nobody knows who he is, right? He's under a fake name, right? Rabbi Emanuel Israel, right? Then he goes by the name Rabbi Hill, then in Ohio. Then he goes by other aliases. After the shooting, he ups and runs. He disappears. They don't find him. Where does he wind up at? All the way in Africa, in Guyana. And he set up Hilltown using similar aliases and preaching the same message of a black Hebrew elite. Why do we have to look into this, family? I want to show y'all this too. I want y'all to see what I'm looking at. Right? I want y'all to see this. This is where you know that the black Hebrew Israelite movement was framed, or they attempted to frame the black Hebrew Israelite movement for the murder of Alberta Williams King, right? This Rabbi Emanuel Israel right here, no one knows who he is, right? He's described in the press as a mentor for Chenault. He left the area immediately after the shooting. In the same period, Rabbi Hill traveled from Ohio to Guyana and set up Hilltown using similar aliases and preaching the same message of a black Hebrew elite. Something fishy going on here, family. This is all a cover up. This is all a setup. These are all plants. These are not black Hebrew Israelites. Dr.Reggy, all of this is a setup. It's a plant. It's a plant. Watch this. Chenault confided to CLC leaders that he was one of many killers who were working to assassinate a long list of black leadership. The names he said were on this list coincided with similar death lists distributed by the KKK and linked to the COINTELPRO operations in the 1960s. Come on, family. Where your research at, Dr. Reggie? I heard Garfield Can't Read say the other day that he's one of the great researchers in the community. Whatever, man. You're trash. Because you don't give the information as it is. But he also said Dr. Reggie is one of the great researchers. And Dr. Reggie does have some great, some things that I agree with, right? But when it comes to these things, when it talks about the black Hebrew Israelites, they all have this thing where they simply want to point the finger and they will lie and omit information to simply discredit the Bible, to discredit the Torah, to discredit those who subscribe to the black Hebrew Israelite paradigm. They will say anything. That's a disinformation cell group. All right. This is what they do all the time. And it's like, you ain't got a lie to kick it. You ain't got a lie to kick it. I mean, I never forget. I asked Jabari once before. Is he made a statement that no such thing as PhD scholars that would agree with the Exodus? And I said, well, how about Douglas Petrovich? He's a PhD scholar that agrees with the Exodus. I said, are you familiar with him? And he says, yes. I said, so then why did you say there are no PhD scholars that agree with the Exodus? I said, do you accept him as a PhD scholar? He just put his head down and shook his head. No. Like, come on, bro. You ain't got a lot to kick it. These guys are bent on disinformation, man. And it's out of control. It really is. It's out of control. But let me continue. But we clearly see that the same list that Chenault confided to the CLC, that there were many killers who were working to assassinate Black leadership. These were the same names and lists that coincided with similar death lists distributed by the KKK and that were linked to the COINTELPRO operations in the 1960s. Come on, family. Who's really behind the assassination of Alberta Williams King, Dr. Reggy? The Black Hebrew Israelites? Is that what you're arguing? We got to do better, family. But they wouldn't even reach that highest level of obtaining that, man. Come on, man. It's crazy. I'm tying all this together. Let's go to this article. The CIA Doctor, the work of Donald Ewan Cameron, from psychic driving to MK Ultra. The CIA Doctor, the work of Donald Ewan Cameron, from psychic driving to MK Ultra. Now remember, we just looked at the Supreme Court renderings from Chenault versus the state. We had two independent psychiatrists state that Chenault was a paranoid schizophrenic. He suffered from schizophrenia. We just read that in the Supreme Court documents, right? Right? We also read earlier that his father, Chenault Sr., was an employee at the Atomic Energy Commission in Ohio, which was ran by former CIA Director James Cone, C-O-N-E, who was also over the MK Ultra program. So now, again, you have less than 1 degree of separation from Marcus Chenault, who assassinated and murdered Alberta William King, Dr. Martin Luther King's mother. You have 1 degree of separation from them two. So this wasn't a random act of violence. This was a CIA Ultra MK COINTELPRO assassination. Why? Because again, she had a formula on how to raise Black men to be Black messiahs. From the questionable death of her son A.D. King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s brother, who died and drowned allegedly in his own swimming pool at his own home, in which the coroner's report was inconclusive on his drowning. There's a possibility that he was dead well before water entered into his lungs. Now we have Chenault, who now is making this exaggerated claim that people around him who knew him said, look, he could be anything. He was changing identities on any given day. He was a Jew, he was a Christian, he was a Muslim, he was a homosexual, he was a black militant, black militant, a homosexual. He changed identities constantly. So this behavior was prominent among the people that knew him every single day of his life and who were around him. And then we get to the Supreme Court after his after his appeal to have his death sentence reduced to a life sentence. We clearly see that now two independent psychiatrists diagnose him as a paranoid schizophrenic. He's suffering from schizophrenia, right? So this is established now. So now what happens? We get to the CIA director, and we get into the bones of the work of Donald Ewan Cameron, from psychic driving to the MK Ultra program. Let's talk about it. Remember that those things I just talked about are important, right? That diagnosis of schizophrenia is important. Watch this, family. This is a research article just recently published. It says Donald Ewan Cameron is known as the Canadian psychiatrist behind the Montreal experiments, a series of brainwashing experiments. As part of a larger Central Intelligence Agency, CIA project known as MK Ultra, right? We know this to be a fact. This is not a conspiracy theory. We know this program was a fact. The CIA regarded these experiments as a potential military weapon during the Cold War. However, a closer look into Cameron's research and Project MK Ultra shows that these experiments began long before Cameron was contacted by the CIA. Additionally, Cameron received funding for his experiments indirectly, so he was probably never aware the money was from the CIA. In this paper, I analyzed the published work of Dr. Cameron from the beginning of his career to his role in MK Ultra, and evaluate his own possible reasoning behind these experiments. Right? So let's get into it. Because I want y'all to understand what's going on here, right? So Donald Ewan Cameron is known for his brainwashing experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, which took place in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Also known as Sub-Project 68 of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency Project MK Ultra. These experiments played a significant role in the CIA's quest to harness mind control. There it is. The CIA's quest to harness mind control as a weapon during the Cold War. The most well-known narrative around Cameron is that of an accomplice to military torture, a man who sold his soul to the CIA and knowingly destroyed the lives of healthy patients. However, this may not be entirely accurate according to Cameron's published research. His theories of psychic driving began before he was even contacted indirectly by the CIA and originated as a possible treatment for mental disorders. Watch this, people. Throughout Cameron's career, much of his work was focused on searching for a cure for what? Schizophrenia, and his depattering treatments that devastated many lives began with the same goal. There it is, schizophrenia. What do we know? That two independent psychiatrists diagnosed Marcus Chenault with the assassin of Alberta Williams King, the mother of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What did two independent psychiatrists diagnose him with? Schizophrenia. Schizophrenia. This was the thing that they looked for in these particular patients. And much cause, as we'll see later on, this experimentation of these people resulted in increased paranoia in schizophrenia. This doctor here, the one that controlled and all helped to create the MK Ultra program, did what? He was searching for a cure for schizophrenia, and his depattering treatments that devastated many lives began with the same goal. They had a perfect test subject in Marcus Chenault, a perfect test subject. Moreover, the CIA officers communicating with the Cameron came to be from the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. So it is entirely likely that Cameron was never aware his research was intended to be used for military purposes. In addition, Cameron was one of the psychiatrists present at the Nuremberg trials. Now, if you don't know what the Nuremberg trials were during World War II. The Nazis, the scientists, right, were brought to court. A lot of them, Nazis, they were brought to court during the Nuremberg trials to try these Nazis with crime against humanity. A lot of them were doctors. Some of those scientists that created the gas chambers, that were creating these different types of experiments on people, right? They were tried at the Nuremberg trials for their crimes against humanity. He was a part of that to evaluate the mental capacity of the accused. These trials serve as a lesson to the world on the importance of ethical research practices. Like most people, Cameron concluded that the experiments were horrific. Thus, we are left with the question, how did Cameron become the mind behind such heinous experiments? In this paper, I shall give an overview of Cameron's purpose research, right? Let me get down here into some of this, right? Watch this. Donald Ewan Cameron was born in Scotland, studied at the University of Glasgow, and lived in many different locations, including Maryland, USA, Switzerland, Manitoba, Canada, and Massachusetts, USA, in that order. In 1935, he published a book called Objective and Experimental Psychology, in which he emphasized the importance of rigorous knowledge of biology when studying psychiatry and heightened the effects of the environment of an individual organism, citing both British and European schools of psychiatry. I want to get down here right there. Here's another one. He worked as a researcher in Albany, New York for many years until the renowned neurosurgeon Dr. Wilder Penfield invited him to work at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. That's a very important place, family. In 1934, Cameron set up his research laboratory known as the Allen Memorial Institute in Ravenscrag, a mansion that formerly belonged to Sir Hugh Allen. Now, just a little tidbit here. If you study the Allen Memorial Institute in Ravenscrag, you'll know that in some references in comic books, I think even in the Marvel comic movies, they have this mansion that they call, or they have this place where they would take mutants to have these experiments on them, right? These gifted people, and do these heinous experiments on them. They would take them to this place called Ravenscraig or Ravenscrag. This is where they get that from. They took it right out the pages of history, right? And put it right into their fiction. So this is where they actually got that from, right? So moving on. It says, Dr. Cameron always believed in a strict scientific method. In his published work, he always stated his research question, clearly outlined the materials and methods, and explained the results. His earlier work in the 1930s covered various topics in psychiatry, including epilepsy, depression, anxiety, emotion, and psychotropic drugs, but he took a particular interest in schizophrenia. Cameron examined many potential treatments for schizophrenia, as well as the psychological differences between people with and without schizophrenia. In 1934, he published the paper, Heat Production and Heat Control in the Schizophrenic Reaction. Patients were placed in extreme heat, a room at 36 to 42 degrees Celsius, for 1 hour. and their change in body temperature was measured. Response to cold was also measured. Patients were placed in a tub of cold water at 28 degrees Celsius for 12 minutes, with their temperature taken every 3 minutes. Participants' baseline body temperatures were measured, as well as body temperatures before and after ingesting food. Results showed that the average body temperature of schizophrenic patients was lower than that of controls, and it also fluctuated more. Schizophrenic patients responded more dramatically to extreme cold, but were no more affected by extreme heat than were controls. So clearly, you see here that a lot of Dr. Ewan Cameron's work was done on dealing with those people suffering or diagnosed with schizophrenia during the development of his MK Ultra mind control program, as we clearly see by two independent psychiatrists that Marcus Chenault, the assassinator of Alberta King, was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. It says, according to Dr. Lehman, patients' insanity levels should be classified 1-4 or I4, that's a DSM-V diagnosis, with 1 being normal and 4 being acutely unstable. Lehman classified Hess as psychotic and described him in having impractical ambitions, impulsive reasoning based on symbolism rather than logic, confabulation with a tendency toward the bizarre, as well as a rigid egocentric attitude, traits that point to schizophrenic personality disintegration. However, when Cameron examined Hess, he observed his symptoms of memory loss were inconsistent with those of a normal amnesia. He concluded that a part of memory loss is simulated, and it's probable that the hysterical unconscious part is rather superficial, saying that this practice of amnesia was originally developed consciously as a protective measure, but had become unconscious in part. So he's saying that amnesia or memory loss of things or events or actions that these people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia are experiencing. This is the testimony that we have that the psychiatrists talk about that happened with Chenault. He didn't remember. Remember the police asked him early on, I talked about when he was initially arrested for the murders, that they asked him, did he remember if he ever shot anyone? And he said, I don't know, maybe, did I? I don't know. He couldn't recall. He had severe memory loss, right? Clearly, they're saying here, these are symptoms of schizophrenia, right? And so we clearly see that connection here. Now, this is what I want to get to right here. The MK Ultra. During the Cold War in the 1950s, the possibility of a nuclear war in the Soviet Union was at such an existential threat that the CIA was determined to make use of the most powerful weapon that they could, the human mind. Mind control was not new to the CIA. In the early 1950s, Project Bluebird was already testing the waters. When Sidney Gottlieb, remember his name as well, when Sidney Gottlieb was hired to the CIA in 1951, his supervisor, Alan Dulles, instructed him to advance the field. Project Bluebird was expanded and soon became known as Project Artichoke, led by Gottlieb. In the early 1950s, the CIA believed that the Russians and the Chinese already had a handle on mind control techniques, citing brainwashing to explain their immense power over their citizens. Determined to keep up in the arms race, American researchers led by Gottlieb began experimenting with interrogation techniques and use of psychotropic drugs, much of which would now be classified as torture. After extensive research into mind control techniques, Gottlieb set out to establish a bigger, more ambitious program to discover the secrets of brain warfare. Once and for all, in 1953, Gottlieb's proposal was approved by Dulles, which was from then on known as MK Ultra. Throughout the search for the secret behind mind control, many people from different backgrounds were recruited, including Dr. James Hamilton, Dr. Robert Hyde, Dr. Louis Jolin West, who were all American psychiatrists. Hamilton worked at Stanford, and he became the researcher behind Sub-Projects 2, 124, and 140. Sub-Project 2 examined how synergistic activity of drugs can irradiate conscience completely, as well as ways to drug a person without their knowledge. That's funny because Jamie Foxx was just talking about this. He believes somebody tried to kill him. He's been in the hospital dealing with the medical issues. He said somebody drugged him without his knowledge. And I even laughed at myself at young Pharaoh when he made this claim the other day. He was being drugged without his knowledge. Sub-Project 124 tested whether inhaling carbon monoxide gas would induce a trance. Sub-Project 140 tested the psychological effects of thyroid hormones. High coordinated sub-projects, and on and on and on and on and on, dealing with this. And I'm going to show you guys something else too, right? Watch this. Dr. Harris Isbell was an American pharmacologist who studied the effects of LSD, masculine psychomimic drugs that cause delusions, and even worked on the preclinical development of new drugs. Another recruit was Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, an American physician and biochemist who studied the presence in hallucinogenic drugs, right? And so we see they even use a part of this Ultra MK program, many different tactics, but it was psychologically based. And they use a lot of psychotropic drugs, right? Including LSD. So they were giving people LSD to see how they respond to certain things. They were getting people hooked on LSD in order to try to for mind control, right? And we can go on and on and on with this. But let me go back and share this. I want to view something else. I'm gonna share something else. Right? Talk about this real quick. I'm gonna give you guys some source information to understand what we're really dealing with here, right? This is the no fringe zone. So watch this. This is Project MK Ultra, the CIA's program of research and behavioral modification. There was a joint hearing before the Select Committee on Intelligence and the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research, Committee on Human Resources, United States Senate, 95th Congress, first session. This occurred in 1977. I want to go down. I think, to page 8. Go down to page 8, I think. Is this it? Here it is. And this is what I wanted to read. This is a prepared statement. A prepared statement of Admiral Stansfield Turner, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Mr. Chairman, in my letter to you on July 15, 1977, I reported our recent discovery of 7 boxes of documents. And this is how they found out publicly about the Project MK Ultra, a closely held CIA project conducted in 1953. But at this time, they're doing this to save face, right? They're doing this to save face. As you may recall, MK Ultra was an umbrella project under which certain sensitive sub-projects were funded and involving other things, research on drugs, behavioral modification, right? And so even when this is even takes us back to the influx of infiltration of cocaine into the Black communities during the 80s. Some say they used it to raise funds and raise money for I believe fighting over in Grenada. But we clearly see similar actions here, right? It says Dr. Frank Olson was publicized. Dr. Olson, a civilian employee of the Army at Fort Detrick, leaped to his death from a hotel room window in New York City about a week after having unwittingly consumed LSD administered to him as an experiment at a meeting of LSD researchers called by the CIA. Most of what was known about the agency's involvement with behavioral drugs during the investigation in 1975 was contained in a report on Project MK Ultra, prepared by the Inspector General's Office in 1963. As a result of that report's recommendations, unwitting testing of drugs in U.S. citizens was subsequently discontinued. The MK Ultra related report was made available to the Church Committee investigators and to staff of Senator Kennedy's subcommittee on health. Until the recent discovery, it was believed that all of the MK Ultra files dealing with behavior modification had been destroyed in 1973 on the orders of then retiring Chief Office of the Technical Service with the authorization of the DCI. Has been previously reported almost all of the people who had any connection with aspects of the project which interested Senate investigators in 1975 were no longer with the agency at that time. Thus, there was little detailed knowledge of MK Ultra sub projects available to CIA during the Church Committee investigations. This lack of availability is more and more. So we clearly see that they were using drugs, LSD. Shalom. Peace to you, Principal Hall. Shout out to you, KLT. They were using psychedelic drugs, LSD. They admit to this. So we know this MK Ultra mind control project was real. This is the no friend zone. No pseudoscience over here. And we're showing the connections between the CIA and the MK Ultra program, the 1 degrees of separation to Chenault, the assassination, because we know, just to recap, Chenault's father worked at the Atomic Energy Commission in Ohio, which was under the direction of former CIA Director James Cone, who was also spearheaded the MK Ultra mind control program. We only got 1 degrees of separation from these guys. We also see that Dr. Cameron, right, one of the founding and leading scientists behind MK Ultra, right, his specific study was dealing with the psychology and the psychiatric paranoid schizophrenia, or schizophrenics. We also know that during his Supreme Court trial, Chenault had 2 independent psychiatrists who diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, the perfect test subject for the MK Ultra program. Less than 1 degrees of separation, family. We already showed the discrepancies in his testimony. We know that he went to the church on June 30th, 1974, to do some counterintelligence, some intelligence, to scope out the land, reconnaissance, I should say. That was at 7:30 in the morning. He leaves, goes, checks in the hotel at 9:30 a.m. and goes back to the church service, where he's already 2 hours earlier surveilled the land. Then he says, after he shoots and kills Boykin and kills Alberta King, that his intentions, quote unquote, allegedly, that his intentions was only to strike at and kill uh, Michael King Sr., the father of Dr. Martin Luther King. But in the Supreme Court documents, it comes out that he testifies that he went there to the church looking for both of them, the mother of King and the father of King. So clearly, I have no doubt in my mind that she was on that list to be assassinated. She was on that list. And as to prevent, and why was she on that list? As to prevent from passing on the knowledge and wisdom, understanding, and encouraging young women of the day and time of how to raise more Black messiahs. She had perfected that formula in her son, Dr. King. Was it the Iran-Contra Nicaragua with Oliver North? I said Grenada, right? Grenada was the weapons Iran-Contra scandal. I phrase you had it. They flooded the streets of New York, from New York to California, with cocaine. The CIA did to raise money to buy guns, to fund that war that they did not win. Right? I want to get into some more of this. This is the CIA's and FBI's connection, because some people are saying, well, isn't the MK Ultra program, isn't that the CIA program and not the FBI program? When it was the FBI that was surveilling them, isn't COINTELPRO a part of the FBI's program? COINTELPRO was headed by the FBI, but the MK Ultra program was also used by the FBI. The CIA and FBI's connection to Project MK Ultra and their use of LSD in the mind control program. See if we can see some of this a little bit. It says MK Ultra CIA's Project FBI files. MK Ultra CIA's Project FBI files. FBI files on Sidney Gottlieb. Remember, we just read about him? One of the founders of the MK program, right? The FBI had a file on them. George Hunt White and Dr. Frank Olson. We just read about them. Persons related to the CIA's Project MK Ultra. In the 1950s and 60s, the CIA engaged in extensive programs of human experimentation using drugs and other psychological means in search of techniques to control human behavior for counterintelligence and covert action purposes. We know they were attempting to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. We know that we're attempting to go after Dr. King, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, peace be upon him. They were going after Angela Davis, Assata Shakur. They were targeting these people. For what? For termination, extermination. Right? MK Ultra was the principal CIA domestic program involving the research and development of chemical and biological agents. When we talk about crack cocaine, y'all best believe this is what we're looking at. Best believe this is what we're looking at. Right? This collection contains FBI files covering Sidney Gottlieb, an American chemist and spy master, best known for his involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency, Project MK Ultra. The file covers his destruction of the project's files. George Hunter White. White ran a safe house in New York City, which people would lured off the street, and then given LSD so they could be watched and filmed from an adjoining apartment through a one-way mirror. White was a former narcotics officer famous for his obsessions to bust Billie Holiday and other famous New York City jazz figures. The files covered the elements of his colorful career. Dr. Frank Olson, a tragic result of the testing of LSD by the CIA was the death of Dr. Frank Olson, a civilian employee of the Army who died on November 27, 1953. His death followed his participation in a CIA experiment with LSD. As a part of this experiment, Olson unwillingly received approximately 70 micrograms of LSD in a glass of Cointreau. I gotta admit, I have no idea what that is. Does anybody know what Cointreau is? I have no idea what that is. He drank on November 19, 1953. The drug had been placed in the bottle by a CIA officer, Dr. Robert Lashbrook, as part of an experiment he and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb performed at a meeting of Army and CIA scientists. Shortly after this experiment, Olson exhibits symptoms of paranoia and schizophrenia. Again, the same thing diagnosed, same thing Chenault was diagnosed with by two independent psychiatrists. This is the tale. This is the result of the MK Ultra program, paranoia and schizophrenia. Accompanied by Dr. Lashbrook, Olson sought psychiatric assistance in New York City from a physician, Dr. Harold Aberson, whose research on LSD had been funded indirectly by the CIA. While in New York for treatment, Olson fell to his death from a 10-story window in the Statler Hotel. He jumped. So again, when we listen to these disinformation cell groups out here, especially over on the HOK and other platforms, Dr. Reggy, when you talk about Black Hebrew Israelites have to answer for the death of Alberta Williams King because apparently Chenault claimed to be an Hebrew Israelite. Again, your information is to a point where it's questionable because you have to go into the fact of the information and the documents that are available, which was easy to find if you really wanted to put out true information. But simply wanting to bang on Hebrew Israelites doesn't do the community a disservice when you leave out the most important things. When you're dealing with COINTELPRO, when you're dealing with MK Ultra, when you're dealing with psychology and psychology, psychiatry illness. The government's plan to squash the whole Black Messiah or Black militant or Black revolutionary movement, the Mau Mau. They were looking to destroy any semblance or any idea of it. So you come to us, Dr. Reggy, with these talking points or with this disinformation. This is the same type of information. And you're not the only one. Garfield does it all the time. These guys do this all the time. Shaka almost does it all the time. But I hear Garfield can't read talk about how well of a researcher he is and how great of a researcher. As a matter of fact, Shaka almost claims to be one of the great researchers of our time. How so, sir? When your information is flawed and skewed and full of confirmation bias. You're not dealing with the facts. Let's deal with the facts. No fringe scholarship, no fringe theories, no pseudoscience, no conspiratorial theories with unfounded information. Something you just made up. No way to connect the dots. You're taking one giant leap to the next. Let's continue. We're getting to the end of this. I'm closing it down. Um, let's deal with the McGill Tribune. Right? And this deals with the McGill Tribune. Declassified mind control at McGill. And we talked about McGill, where they were doing these experiments up at the Allen Memorial Institute at Ravengraph Mansion, right? And here we go again. We're going to talk about it again. The Allen Memorial Institute is located in the ominous mansion, formerly known as Ravenscraft, that looms over Rue McTavish at the foot of Mount Royal. The sinister stone building, said to be haunted, is befitting of the grisly experiment that occurred within its walls from 1957 to 1964. Project MK Ultra, the Central Intelligence Agency and CIA mind control project, used unconsenting, we get that right, unconsenting patients to test the effects of sensory deprivation, LSD, electroshock therapy, and other methods of controlling the human psyche. Although it may sound like something out of a dystopian sci-fi novel, these experiments were conducted at McGill with devastating effects on the patients involved. Project MK Ultra was a large-scale attempt by the CIA to research behavioral modification and the effects of certain drugs and psychological treatments on the human mind. It consists of 144 different sub-projects related to the control of human behavior. 144 ways to drive you crazy. That's what they figured, and that's crazy. Which were carried out in 89 different institutes. Wow. Wow, that's massive. That's massive. They were literally trying to control the mind of the masses. And I think this whole COVID-19 outbreak, to see how we would respond to it, was also a part of one of these projects that are still going on today. That's just my assessment. I don't have any proof of that, but that's what I see. To see how we would respond. I hear you, Lance. Lance, I did come across some information where I did agree with you, man, on some things. That's why I wanted you to hit me up, man, so we could talk about it when you get a chance. Right? This is a No Fringe Zone podcast. Welcome to the No Fringe Zone. Right? So as I was saying, I believe this whole COVID-19 situation was a part of it as well. One of these sub projects to see how we would respond, to see how well they could quickly inject fear into the community, how well they can inject fear that gets us to act a certain way. You know, folks was going crazy over toilet paper. Folks were going crazy over Lysol. They were going crazy over this. How they watched us respond to these certain things. And I felt like they just sat back in their lab all the while with these experimentations on these viruses that have been around for years, watching people die, killing off people who they deemed that weren't important. And remember, these were most of the people that were affected by it were elderly. Another disinformation campaign. I mean, depopulation campaign. Right? But again, I have no proof of that. This is the No Friend Zone. No Friend Scholarship here. But the experiments with each subject varied in both their purpose and techniques, but many, including those undertaken at McGill, involved invasive and unethical research on unwitting human subjects. So they was doing this stuff without these people knowledge. And you know they've always done this, right? Injecting, syphilis virus into black men down in Tuskegee. They've been doing this since they came to this country. We can go all the way back to the Pilgrims passing out infected smallpox blankets. That stuff is true in fact. Biological and chemical warfare. They've been practicing this since they came to this country. They never forgot how those infected smallpox blankets wiped out millions in the population of American Indians or Native Indians in this country. They haven't forgotten that. They've been trying to recreate it ever since. Why? Because they were able to capture and control this land. Let's continue. The events of the Project MK Ultra, Shalaki, are cloaked in mystery. As almost all of the records of the project were destroyed in 1973 by Richard Helms, the director of the CIA at the time. We go down here. Media outlets in the 1960s and 70s jumped on the story when it was revealed, sensationalizing the facts. This combined with the few records that are still in existence make the truth surrounding MK Ultra murky. Despite the shrouded nature of the project and the hazy details around it, it is certain that unethical experiments were performed at many institutions, including McGill University. Here's a picture, man. This Ravens Crag, man. Don't that look like those scary places they be showing, man, in these movies? In these Marvel movies, man, when they be hiding in these old mansions, they be experimenting on people. That's where they got this from. With art imitates life. I already said it in reverse, but here. Look just like that. Look at it. The CIA seeks key to mind control. Listen to what they say. We have become pretty well convinced after the experiences of the brainwashing problems coming out of China that it was the techniques of the interrogators that were causing the individuals to make confessions, says John Gittinger, a CIA psychologist, in a testimony from a 1977 Joint Senate hearing. The CIA was initially interested in discovering the truth serum. At the time, many believed in the possibility of a drug to use in interrogations that would eliminate all inhibitions and prompt subjects to speak without reticence. The CIA first experimented with the use of LSD with little luck, and later delved into different types of psychotherapy and hypnosis in the hopes of discovering the secret of mind control. Out of the research and experiments that were undertaken within hospitals and laboratories, those that took place at McGill, known as MK Ultra, Sub Project 68, were perhaps the most notorious. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, we talked about him earlier, was the head of McGill Allen's Memorial Institute, where the experiments were performed, and the main researcher implicated in the project. According to the information from the 1977 Senate hearing, most of the researchers and doctors involved in Project MK Ultra, including Cameron, were not informed of the project or of the fact that the funds for the research originated from the spy agency. In order to conceal the source of money, the CIA created research foundations such as the Human Ecology Fund to act as fronts for funneling MK Ultra research funds. The CIA then worked through such organizations to target researchers with projects that were of interest to them in developing techniques of interrogation or human behavior control. Isn't that crazy? And they be wanting you to submit to this fund and submit to that fund. Right? And here he is here. And again, Cameron's research was focused on discovering the root causes of mental illness and finding ways to cure them. He believed that manifestation of mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, was the result of repeated patterns of socially unhealthy behavior in patients, and concluded that it could be cured by depatterning these unsound habits. The depattering was meant to break down the patient's personality completely in order to rebuild it from scratch. Wow. There he is. There he is, the mastermind, the doctor behind the MK Ultra project. And here's what I wanted to show you. According to the Canadian government, approximately 80 patients at the Allen Memorial Institute underwent depatterning. The treatment involved putting patients into a prolonged period of sleep for several days through the administration of barbiturates, drugs that depress the central nervous system, and LSD. This was followed by massive doses of electric shock therapy over the course of several weeks, ultimately reducing patients to a childlike state. Isn't that exactly how people who were familiar with Chenault, the murderer, the assassin of Alberta King, isn't they how they describe him? Is having like this childlike appearance. Even when the police arrested him, they talked about the childlike behavior that he had. Look at any picture, any photograph that you see out here of him. You see that sort of that childlike look on the face of this grown man, right? 23 years old, but he has like this childlike essence or behavior pattern to him, right? This childlike state, right? Again, the method consisted essentially of administration of 2 to 4 electrode shocks daily. That's crazy. To the point where the patient developed acute confusion, disorientation, and interference with learned habits of eating and bladder and bowel control. Cameron wrote in an article published in the journal Comprehensive Psychiatry in 1962, the patient might also show loss of a second language or all knowledge of his marital status. Jeez. Once patients' brains were depatterned, Cameron believed that they could be retaught proper forms of interaction and behavior. This practice, which Cameron dubs psychic driving, involves subjecting patients to repeated audio recordings in order to reinforce positive messages within their minds. Now, what was stopping them from having him listen to things about hating Christians and about killing and murdering people? If their intentions was to break him down, and they were successfully in breaking people down where they can rebuild them back up. This is crazy. It talks about he was an authoritarian, ruthless, power hungry, nervous, tense, angry. Not very nice, Dr. Elliot Emanuel, one of Cameron's former colleagues, said of the doctor in the 1980 interview with CBC. So now you have a doctor, a colleague who's worked with him, that says this guy was an authoritarian, he was ruthless, he was power hungry, he was nervous, tense, angry, and not very nice. These guys are sadistic, man. Sadistic. Exactly, Afro-Asiatic, real devils in the flesh. Now I want to get to something else. I want to show y'all something. And how we all tie this together, right? How we all connect all this together. The Black Hebrew Israelites, COINTELPRO, Ultra MK, the assassination of Alberta King, all of this, right? And who's actually responsible. Clearly, I've presented enough information to question whether or not Chenault worked on his own. We clearly see with the information provided, no one believes that. We clearly see with the information provided that he may have been under some type of Ultra MK mind control program, right? Connecting the schizophrenia he was diagnosed with by two independent psychiatrists, right? Which we know was one of the precursors or one of the effects of dealing in this, being involved in this particular program, paranoid schizophrenia, also delusions of grandeur coming out of these programs after electroshock treatment, being given administered LSD to these people with paranoid schizophrenia, um, having a childlike behavior or state. All of these things were the same way Chenault was prescribed when he was arrested. Memory loss, didn't recall the incident. Right? Now let's get into this. This is very interesting, family. We at the 3:15 mark and we get ready to shut this thing down. Like, share, and subscribe, man. Now watch this. This is called it's the black hole of I can't say it. The black hole of Guyana. The untold story of the Jonestown massacre, right? By John Judge, 1985. But what I want to go down to is right here. No, let me do that. I think that's page 8. Page 8 I was looking for. Watch this, people. This is crazy. Right? Now, Jonestown is where Jim Jones took his followers over into Africa and they committed the mass suicide. Watch this. Watch this, what I want to show y'all. Right here. It says the Messiah of Ukiah, as he was known then, met and recruited Timothy Stone, a Stanford graduate member of the city's DA office, and his wife Grace. During this time, the Layton family, Terry Buford and George Phillip Blakely, and other important members joined the temple. The camp doctor Larry Shaw claims Jones got him off drugs. They're talking about Jim Jones, right? And into medical school during the period. These were not just street urchins. Buford's father was a commander for the fleet of the Philadelphia Navy. So they talk about the high level people, high society people that Jim Jones actually recruited. But watch this. Dr. Layton donated at least $250,000 to Jones. His wife, son, and daughter were all members of the temple. George Blakely married David Layton from the wealthy British family. He donated $60,000 to pay the lease for the 27,000-acre Guyana site in 1974 in Africa. Right? Now, what's the connection? Right? What's the connection between Jim Jones, Jonestown, Black Hebrew Israelites, Marcus Chenault, the assassin who killed Alberta Williams King, the MK Ultra program, the CIA, and the FBI? Watch this. They only 1 degrees of separation. Watch this. I want to read right right. Let me get to it right in here. Let me see. All this is dealing with Jim Jones. Because I mentioned it earlier when we talked about, here we are, when we talked about the fake rabbi, right? Remember I told you that this fake rabbi that was connected to Chenault as being his mentor in this Black Hebrew Israelite camp in Ohio. This fake mentor. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. It says inside Ghanaian itself, approximately 25 miles to the south of Matthews Ridge, is a community called Hilltown. Remember, I told you this fake Hebrew, this fake Israelite, right? Rabbi Emmanuel Israel, right? After who was supposed to be the mentor of Chenault, after the shooting and the murder of Alberta King, immediately left the country under another alias name by the name of Rabbi Hill, right? And he goes to Guyana. This is the same place Jim Jones goes to and starts Jonestown. Same place. He goes and starts another community only 25 miles away. And he calls it Hilltown, right? Named after the religious leader Rabbi Hill. Hill has used the names Abram Israel, Rabbi Emmanuel Washington, and Rabbi Emmanuel Washington. Hilltown set up about the same time. Watch this. He set up about the same time as Jonestown did. Followed the departure of David Hill, who was known in Cleveland, right, where Chenault lived. They lived in Cleveland, Ohio, a fugitive of the U.S. courts. Hill rules with an iron fist over 8,000 Black people from Ghana in America who believe they are the lost tribe of Israel and the real Hebrews of biblical prophecy. Used as a strong-armed troops and internal mercenaries to ensure Burnham's election, as were Jonestown members, the Hilltown people were allowed to clear the Jonestown site of shoes and unused weapons. So they allowed these Hilltown people to come after Jim Jones' massacre of over 900 of his followers. They allowed this group to come into Jonestown and to take belongings and weapons out of there and carry it back to them to Hilltown, right? This is the same group that was supposedly spearheaded by the mentor of Chenault, the person who shot and killed Alberta King, right? It says the Hilltown people were allowed to clear the Jonestown site of shoes and unused weapons, both in short supply in Guyana. Hill says his followers would gladly kill themselves at his command, but he would survive since, unlike Jones, he is in control. Similar camps were reported at the time in the Philippines. Perhaps the best known example is the fascist torture group camp in Chile known as Colonia Dignidad, also a religious cult built around a single individual. This came from Germany to Chile in 1961. In both cases, the camps was their agricultural experiment, sealed and protected by the dreaded Chilean Dyna police. Colonia serves as a torture chamber for political dissidents. To the Jonestown monstrosities, they have added dogs specifically trained to attack human genitals. The operations there have included and heavy-landed decapitation specialists, and so on and so on. American CIA agents visits there. Nazi war criminals who believe they set up sites there in these areas. So here, all these agencies, all of these camps have links to U.S. intelligence agencies. This is what they're telling you here. All of these different camps, right? Jonestown, Hillstown, the Chilean getaway. All of these people in the same area in these remote places in Guyana, right? And over in Chile, all have connections to the CIA. The American intelligence agents have a sordid history of cooperative relationship with Nazi war criminals and international fascism. In light of this, consider the curious ties of family members of the top lieutenants of Jim Jones, the Leighton family, the chemical biological warfare people. These people were involved in chemical warfare and biology, right? Just as we saw the connection with Chenault's father. Worked at the Atomic Energy Commission in Cleveland. Like, we clearly see government infiltration here, right? So again, now they go down the strange connection to the murder of Martin Luther King. The first clue is this link appeared in the personal histories of members of Ryan investigation team who were so selectively and deliberately killed at Point Ketamine. Tuma. Don Harris, a veteran NBC reporter, has been the only network newsman on the scene to cover Martin Luther King's activity in Memphis at the time of King's assassination. So they're clearly connecting the CIA, Jonestown, Hillstown, all of these things. They're connecting to the CIA in these assassination plots and attempts. James Earl Ray is connected to this as well, right? All of these things. Right? Watch this. Another important figure in the murder of Martin Luther King was his mother, Alberta. A few weeks after the first public announcement by Coretta Scott King that she believed her husband's murder was part of a conspiracy, Mrs. Alberta King was brutally shot to death in Atlanta while attending church service. Anyone who has seen the physical wound suffered by King might have been adverse witness to the official version, since the wound angles did not match the ballistic direction of a shot from the rooming house. Her death also closely coincided with the reopening of the Tennessee State Court review of Ray's conviction based on a guilty plea required by a Sixth Circuit Court decision. The judge in this case reportedly refused to allow witnesses from beyond a 100-mile radius from the courtroom. The man convicted of shooting King's mother was Marcus Wayne Chenault. His emotional effect following the murder was unusual. Grinning, he asked if he had hit anyone. He had reportedly been dropped off to the church by people he knew in Ohio. While at Ohio State University, he was part of a group known as the Troop, run by the black minister, the gun collector who used the name Rabbi Emmanuel Israel. This man, described in the press as a mentor for Chenault, left the area immediately after the shooting. In the same period, Rabbi Hill traveled from Ohio to Guyana to set up Hillstown, 25 miles away from Jonestown to Jim Jones, using similar aliases and preaching the same message of a black Hebrew Israelite, black Hebrew elite. Chenault confided to CLC leaders that he was one of the many killers who was working to assassinate a long list of black leadership. The names he said were on the list coincided with similar death lists distributed by the KKK and linked to the COINTELPRO. The real backgrounds and identities of Marcus Wayne Chenault and Rabbi Hill may never be discovered. But one thing is certain: Martin Luther King would never have countenanced the preachers of Jim Jones had he lived here. He lived to hear them. There it is, family. There it is, family. So when we have people who talk about, oh, look at what the black Hebrew Israelites did, they were responsible for killing Dr. King's mother, you have no evidence of that other than what we see here. The MK Ultra program, the CIA, the FBI, all conspiring. The supposed Hebrew Israelite mentor of Chenault. Right? These are things and people that we know had a direct line connection to Chenault, to the murder, to the assassination of Alberta King. So, Dr. Reggie, no, we don't owe an explanation to you or anyone else as Israelites about the murder of of Alberta King. But we do have to ask the proper question, Dr. Reggie, who's responsible for her death? And clearly, with evidence presented here, you're welcome to challenge it. But the evidence presented here, we clearly see this is CIA, FBI, US government, COINTELPRO assassination. And to do what? To squash any black militant movement, including the Black Hebrew Israelite movement at the time in 1974, at its height. At its height, coming out of the One West camps. These are the things we need to understand instead of listening to the disinformation that comes out of these disinformation cell groups, especially those in the HOK with Garfield Can't Read and Dr. Reggie and Shaka Almost. But that's it for today, people. Please like, share, subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please share it. Please talk about it. Right? Peace and blessings to y'all, family. Peace to you, Dr. Rob. Peace to you, Sister Free Spirit. Audi 100, peace to you, fam. Peace to you, family. Shout out to FOP, man. I appreciate y'all, man. I appreciate y'all, man, 100%. I appreciate y'all, 100%. Shout out to Black Jesus Minister in the building. I appreciate you, man. Shout out to Black Jesus Minister. Yahoo Israel. Peace to you, Indigenous Black man, as always. Yahoo, shalom to you, family. Daniel, glad to have you in the building today. Afro-Asiatic as always. Peace to you, family. Sakara Patrice Bishop, peace to you, family. Peace and blessings. Marquisa Samarian, peace to you, family. Shout out to you, KOT, Prince of Yahweh. Shout out to you, fam. Thanks for being in the building. My man Lance Single in the building today, man. Peace to you, family. We're going to close this thing out, man. Hope y'all enjoyed the presentation, man. Again, look for me, man. I'm going to be Killer Priest soon on his channel. I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to talk to Sister Nepal, see when I'm going to do some presentations over there, and some debates over there as well on the Killer Priest channel. Also, look for me in the Ultimate Debate League tournament. Actually, the Ultimate Debate Tournament. JJ 7000, Black Jesus Minister, SVDL, and Debate Talk for You. Shout out to Sal Showtime again. Let's get into that. As well as I'm working on my next presentation right now, man. I just really want to just a few more things I got to put together that we're going to be bringing out and dealing with that, man. So again, man, I appreciate y'all for tuning in. And man, we've been on for a minute, but I wanted to get that presentation out, man. So peace and blessings to y'all, family. And this is the No Friend Zone.